Bathsheba's name has been whispered in scandal for thousands of years, but here's what will shock you. She was likely just 14 years old when King David first saw her bathing on that rooftop. What happened next would change the course of an entire kingdom and reveal both the darkest abuse of power and the most beautiful story of redemption in Scripture. As you close your eyes tonight, let me take you on a gentle journey through her complete story, from a young woman's innocence shattered to a mother's heartbreak to her rise as one of the most influential queens in biblical history. But before you get comfortable, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you find this type of content valuable. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? In the quiet hours when day meets night, when shadows grow long and gentle across ancient stones, there lived a woman whose name would echo through time itself, Bathsheba. Even now, thousands of years later, her story whispers to us across the centuries. She was not born to greatness, yet greatness found her. She did not seek the throne rooms of kings, yet kings would shape her destiny. In the soft twilight of Jerusalem, where olive trees swayed in evening breezes and oil lamps began to flicker in windows, her life unfolded like water finding its course. What made her special? Perhaps it was her quiet strength, the way she moved through a world of powerful men with grace intact. Maybe it was her wisdom, earned not in schools, but in the careful navigation of palace halls and the tender raising of a future king. Or perhaps it was simply this: she endured. Through scandal and sorrow, through loss and triumph, she remained. Jerusalem in those days was a city of dreams and shadows. King David ruled from his palace on the hill, the man who had slain giants and united tribes, now wearing a crown that sometimes felt too heavy. Below him, the city bustled with merchants and priests, soldiers and servants, all living beneath the same stars that watched over Abraham's children. Bathsheba's husband Uriah served in David's army. A loyal man, a Hittite who had chosen to follow the God of Israel and fight for his chosen king. Their home was modest but comfortable, filled with the quiet contentment of two people who had found love in a turbulent world. She was beautiful. Yes, the scriptures tell us this without shame or apology. Beauty was God's gift to her, like wisdom to Solomon or courage to David. But beauty in ancient times could be as much curse as blessing, especially for a woman living in the shadow of a king's palace. On quiet evenings, when the heat of the day had passed and cool air drifted through the city, Bathsheba would tend to her home. She would draw water from the well, her movements graceful and unhurried. She would light the evening lamp, prepare simple meals, and wait for news from the battlefield where her husband served his king. The rooftops of Jerusalem were places of refuge then, flat surfaces where families could escape the close quarters below, where they could catch the evening breeze and watch the stars emerge. Privacy was precious and rare. In such a city, in such times, lives intersected in ways both wonderful and dangerous. Bathsheba lived her days with quiet purpose. She helped neighbors when they needed aid. She offered prayers at the appointed times. She wove cloth and tended her small garden, finding peace in simple tasks that connected her to generations of women before her. The city around her hummed with the energy of David's reign. Trade flourished. Enemies had been defeated. The Ark of God rested in Jerusalem, making it not just a political capital, but a spiritual center. Yet with prosperity came new temptations, new complications. Success sometimes breeds its own troubles. In the evenings, when work was done and the day's heat had faded, she would climb to her rooftop. There, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a city settling into night, she would find her moments of solitude. The view stretched across Jerusalem's hills, taking in the palace above and the homes below, all of it bathed in the soft light of oil lamps and early stars. She could not have known in those peaceful moments how dramatically her life would change, how a single evening would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom, how her name would become forever linked with questions of power and desire, justice and mercy, human frailty and divine grace. But perhaps that is how all great stories begin, in quiet moments, with ordinary people living ordinary lives before the extraordinary breaks in like dawn over the mountains. Bathsheba was simply a woman in love with her husband, faithful to her God, content in her small corner of the great city of David. The stars above Jerusalem had watched over countless such women, and they would watch over countless more. But this one, this quiet woman of still waters, would prove different. Her story would become woven into the very fabric of Israel's history, like a thread both dark and golden in the tapestry of God's mysterious ways. Night settles gently over ancient Jerusalem. Oil lamps flicker in windows. A woman climbs to her rooftop, unaware that tomorrow will change everything. But tonight, there is only peace, only the soft whisper of wind through olive branches, only the quiet contentment of a life lived faithfully in the shadow of eternity. The city of David, Jerusalem, sleeps beneath a canopy of stars, but even in slumber, the city dreams of destiny. This is no ordinary place, no simple collection of homes and markets clustered around a hilltop. This is the city David chose, the place where heaven and earth seem to touch, where the presence of God has made his dwelling among his people. The morning sun rises slowly over the ancient walls, painting the limestone in shades of gold and amber. Merchants begin to stir in the lower city, preparing their wares for another day of trade. The aroma of baking bread drifts through narrow streets where children will soon play and mothers will call them home for meals. But Jerusalem is more than commerce and daily life. It pulses with the rhythm of worship, with the prescribed sacrifices and festivals that mark the Hebrew calendar. The priests move through their sacred duties while the Levites prepare their songs. This is a city where the eternal has broken into time, where divine promises take on flesh and stone. David's palace crowns the highest hill, a testament to how far the shepherd boy has traveled. From the fields of Bethlehem to the throne of Israel, his journey reads like something from a dream. Yet here he sits, king over God's chosen people, ruler of a realm that stretches from Dan to Beersheba. The palace itself speaks of newly acquired grandeur, cedar timbers from Lebanon, quarried stone fitted with careful precision, courtyards where the king can walk and think and pray. It is beautiful but somehow tentative, as if David himself still marvels at finding himself here, in these rooms where kings make decisions that echo through generations. Below the palace, the city spreads in concentric circles of influence and importance. The wealthy build their homes of stone, with spacious rooms and private courtyards. The poor make do with simpler dwellings, but even they share in the prosperity that peace has brought to Israel. No longer do they fear raids from Philistines or Ammonites. David's victories have purchased them security. The streets buzz with languages from across the known world. Hebrew dominates, but Phoenician traders haggle in their coastal tongue, while Egyptian merchants display wares from the Nile Delta. Even Hittites like Uriah have found welcome here, drawn not just by David's military prowess, but by his God, the Lord who has proven himself mighty in battle and faithful in covenant. Water flows through the city via David's ingenious engineering. The ancient spring of Gihon still provides as it has for centuries, but now tunnels and channels carry its life-giving stream to neighborhoods that once went thirsty. Innovation serves devotion. Practical skill advances spiritual purpose. The women of Jerusalem move through their days with a confidence unknown in less secure times. They draw water without fear of raiders. They send their husbands and sons to fields and workshops instead of constant warfare. They raise children who will know peace as their birthright, a gift purchased by David's earlier battles. Yet prosperity brings its own temptations. Wealth can corrupt, as surely as poverty can embitter. Success sometimes breeds arrogance. The very security that should lead to gratitude can instead foster complacency. Even in God's chosen city, human hearts remain human hearts. The palace guards change, shift with practiced precision. These are David's mighty men, veterans of countless campaigns, warriors whose loyalty has been tested in battles whose names are already becoming legend. They would die for their king without hesitation, but they cannot guard him from every enemy, especially those that rise from within. In the marketplace, Syrian silks hang beside Judean wool. Spices from distant lands scent the air, while local farmers offer the fruits of fields blessed by timely rains. Trade routes that once carried only armies now bear merchants and their goods. Swords have been beaten into plowshares, at least for now. The priests conduct their daily sacrifices morning and evening, the smoke rising like incense toward heaven. These rituals connect present Jerusalem to the ancient promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They remind everyone who observes them that Israel exists not by human might, but by divine election, not by earthly wisdom, but by heavenly covenant. Children play in streets that their grandparents remember as battlefields. They know David's songs of victory, but not the desperate nights when defeat seemed certain. Peace has become their normal. They cannot imagine any other way. This innocence is both Jerusalem's blessing and its danger, for it makes vigilance harder and temptation easier. The sun climbs higher and the city fully awakens. Artisans open their workshops, judges take their seats to hear disputes, teachers gather students to study the law of Moses. Life flows forward with the steady rhythm of a people finally at rest in their promised land. But on the highest hill, in the palace of cedar and stone, a king sometimes walks alone on his rooftop, looking out over the city God has given him to govern. The view is magnificent, the responsibility overwhelming. From this height, David can see everything and everyone under his care. And sometimes, in the quiet of evening, he sees more than he should. The rise of David long, before palaces and kingdoms, before crown and scepter, there was a boy in the fields of Bethlehem. His name was David, and his world was sheep and streams, green pastures and still waters. His hands knew the feel of a shepherd's rod, his eyes the movement of clouds across wide skies. His heart was being shaped by solitude and starlight, by the daily lessons that only wilderness can teach. Jesse had 8 sons, but David was the youngest, the one left behind when important visitors came calling. While his brothers stood tall and proud before the prophet Samuel, David remained with the flock. Someone had to watch the sheep. Someone had to guard against wolves and lions and bears. It seemed a small job, a child's work, hardly worthy of notice. But God notices what others overlook. When Samuel's eyes passed over the older brothers, when the prophet's heart remained unmoved by their strength and stature, the Lord whispered a different word. "Send for the youngest," he said. "Bring the shepherd boy from the fields. The one you forgot is the one I have chosen." The anointing oil was warm on David's forehead, sacred and strange. His brothers watched in wonder as Samuel's hands blessed the boy they had always seen as least among them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon David that day, though years would pass before anyone understood what it meant. Kings are not made in a moment. They are prepared through seasons of testing that often look like failure. Back to the fields David went, but now he carried something new within him. The sheep could not see it, the wolves could not smell it, but it was there. The quiet certainty that God had plans beyond anything he could imagine. He still played his harp under the stars, still fought off predators with sling and stone, but now his songs carried deeper harmonies. His aim grew truer with each cast. When the giant came, David was ready without knowing he was ready. Goliath towered over the armies of Israel like a mountain made of bronze and iron, his voice shaking the earth with blasphemous boasts. Seasoned warriors trembled before him. The king himself cowered in his tent. But David heard something different in that mockery. Not just insult to Israel, but offense against the living God. The sling felt natural in his hand, familiar as his own heartbeat. The stone flew straight and true, guided by faith forged in lonely nights when he had trusted God to help him save his father's sheep. Goliath fell like a tree cut down, and Israel's victory shout echoed across the valley. In one moment, the shepherd boy became a hero. Fame followed David like a faithful dog. Songs were written about his victory, melodies that spread through every village and town. Saul has killed his thousands, the women sang, but David his 10,000s. The words were meant as praise, but they planted seeds of jealousy in the king's heart. Success can be harder to bear than failure, especially when it belongs to someone else. Saul's court welcomed David at first. The young man's harp could soothe the king's troubled spirit. His courage could inspire the army's ranks. But as David's star rose, Saul's seemed to dim. The darkness in the king's heart grew deeper, and the music that once brought peace began to stir his rage instead. 2 spears hurled in anger missed their mark, but they found their meaning. David was no longer safe in the palace. Exile taught David lessons no crown could provide. He learned to lead by running, to trust while hunted, to forgive while persecuted. In caves and wilderness places, a band of outcasts gathered around him. Men who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from following a leader who refused to take what God had not yet given. Twice David could have killed Saul. Twice opportunity presented itself like fruit hanging low on a tree. His men urged him to take his destiny into his own hands, to end the persecution with a sword stroke. But David's heart knew a truth his followers could not grasp. Thrones are not taken, they are received. What God gives in his time cannot be improved by human haste. Saul died on Mount Gilboa, and David wept real tears for the man who had tried to destroy him. The crown came to David not through ambition, but through tragedy, not as conquest, but as inheritance. He had learned to wait for God's timing, and God's timing proved perfect even when it felt impossibly slow. First came Hebron, where Judah anointed him king over one tribe. 7 years of partial rule, of building trust and proving wisdom. The northern tribes watched and waited, testing this son of Jesse who claimed the promises made to their ancestors. Slowly, surely, they saw in David what God had seen in the fields of Bethlehem, a heart shaped for kingship, a soul prepared for the impossible burden of leading God's chosen people. Finally came Jerusalem, the ancient city perched on its hill like a crown waiting for the right head. The Jebusites thought it impregnable, but David found a way where others saw only walls. The city of David it became, but not by right of conquest alone, by divine appointment, by heavenly election, by the mysterious working of providence through human courage and faith. The ark came home to Jerusalem with dancing and celebration, with music and joy that echoed off the ancient stones. David himself danced before the Lord with all his might, his royal robes abandoned for simple linen, his dignity set aside for pure worship. Some mocked his abandonment, but God smiled at the heart that had never forgotten its beginnings in Bethlehem's fields. From shepherd to king, from sling to scepter, from hiding in caves to ruling from palaces, David's journey reads like testimony to the God who lifts up the humble and brings down the proud. But journeys never truly end, they only change direction. The boy who became king would soon face tests that made Goliath seem small, choices that would echo through generations yet unborn. A palace on the roof. The palace of David rises from Jerusalem's highest hill like a dream made manifest in cedar and stone. Each morning the sun finds it first, painting its walls in shades of gold that speak of divine favor and earthly success. This is no mere dwelling, but a statement, a declaration that the shepherd boy has indeed become king, that God's promises can transform the humblest beginnings into the most exalted destiny. Cedar beams from the forests of Lebanon stretch across the great hall, their rich scent mingling with the incense that rises from the altar courts below. Phoenician craftsmen have carved these timbers with skill, passed down through generations, creating columns that seem to grow from the floor like mighty trees. The wood itself tells a story of friendship and alliance, for King Hiram of Tyre sent these trees as gifts to honor David's reign. The walls rise in courses of carefully fitted stone, each block quarried from the hills around Jerusalem and shaped by master masons who understand both beauty and strength. These are not the rough fortifications of a military camp, but the refined architecture of a permanent kingdom, built to last through generations of David's descendants. Every joint speaks of confidence in the future, every arch of faith in God's enduring covenant. Windows open toward every direction, offering views that encompass all of Jerusalem and the hills beyond. To the west, the Mediterranean catches sunlight like scattered silver. To the east, the Jordan Valley stretches toward distant mountains where Moses once stood to glimpse the Promised Land. North and south, the territory of Israel spreads like a scroll unrolled, displaying the inheritance God has given to his people. But it is the roof that sets this palace apart from common dwellings. Here, above the noise and bustle of the city below, David has created a place of solitude and reflection. The rooftop garden blooms with flowering trees and fragrant herbs, watered by channels that carry precious water from hidden cisterns. Date palms provide shade, while olive trees offer their ancient blessing of peace. Pathways wind between raised beds where roses and jasmine perfume the evening air. Benches carved from single blocks of stone invite contemplation, while a fountain in the center sends up its gentle spray to catch rainbows in the morning light. This is David's sanctuary, his place of escape from the endless demands of kingship, where he can remember the shepherd's fields and sing the songs that made him famous. The view from these heights encompasses not just distance, but authority. Every roof in Jerusalem spreads below. Every courtyard and street corner falls within the king's sight. The marketplace with its morning bustle, the temple courts with their sacred smoke, the homes of rich and poor alike, all of it lies open to David's gaze like pages in an unbound book. Power brings perspective, but perspective can bring temptation. From this elevated place, a king can see everything, yet understand nothing. Distance provides clarity, but also detachment. The people below become patterns rather than personalities, figures in a grand design rather than individuals with hopes and fears, dreams and struggles that mirror his own. Servants move through the palace with quiet efficiency, attending to the countless details that make royal life possible. They prepare meals and maintain chambers, tend gardens and guard doorways, all of them devoted to serving the man who serves the nation. Yet, even surrounded by such attention, David often finds himself alone, especially in the evening hours when the weight of the crown feels heaviest. The throne room dominates the palace's public face, its ceiling soaring toward heaven while its floor stretches wide enough to hold the assemblies of Israel's elders. Here, David renders judgment, receives ambassadors, and conducts the formal business of the kingdom. Golden lampstands cast dancing shadows on walls hung with tapestries that tell the story of God's faithfulness to his people. Private chambers offer respite from public duties. David's own room opens onto the rooftop garden, allowing him to step directly from sleep into the embrace of morning air and growing things. A writing table holds scrolls and reed pens for the correspondence that flows constantly between Jerusalem and the provinces. Maps spread across another table show the boundaries of the realm he governs by divine appointment. The palace kitchens work without ceasing, preparing not just for the royal family, but for the constant stream of visitors, officials, and petitioners who seek audience with the king. Spices from distant lands mingle with local produce to create feasts worthy of David's growing reputation. Wine cellars hold vintage from the hill country of Judah, pressed from grapes that grow in soil blessed by covenant promises. Guard chambers house the warriors who protect the king's person and the palace's treasures. These are David's mighty men, veterans of the campaigns that established the kingdom, soldiers whose loyalty has been proven in battles whose names are already becoming legend. They sleep lightly and rise quickly, always ready to defend the man they followed from obscurity to glory. Guest quarters welcome the endless parade of visitors who come to pay homage to David's reign. Governors and generals, merchants and musicians, priests and prophets all find hospitality within these walls. The palace has become not just David's home, but Israel's center, the place where decisions are made that will echo through generations, yet unborn. As evening approaches and the heat of the day begins to fade, David often climbs to his rooftop retreat. Here, among the flowers and fountains, he can shed the weight of public responsibility and remember the boy who once tended sheep in Bethlehem's fields. The stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, the same stars that watched over him during those long nights of preparation for a destiny he could never have imagined. The bath evening settles over Jerusalem like a gentle hand, bringing coolness after the day's heat and quiet after its noise. In homes throughout the city, families gather for evening meals while merchants close their stalls and children are called in from their play. Oil lamps begin to flicker in windows as darkness creeps across the ancient stones, transforming the bustling city into a place of shadows and whispered conversations. In a house not far from the palace, Bathsheba prepares for the sacred ritual that will cleanse away the day's accumulated dust and weariness. The bronze basin has been filled with water drawn fresh from the well, its surface reflecting the last light of day like a mirror made of sky. This is not mere washing, but purification, a practice rooted in laws given by Moses and observed by faithful women for generations. The water is warm, heated over coals that still glow softly in the evening air. Steam rises in delicate spirals, carrying with it the scent of herbs that have been steeped to make the water fragrant and healing. Mint and myrtle, rosemary and rose petals, simple gifts from God's creation that transform ordinary water into something approaching luxury. Privacy was precious in ancient Jerusalem, where homes pressed close together and lives intersected at every corner. Bathsheba has chosen this evening hour with care, waiting until the bustle of day has faded and neighbors have withdrawn to their own concerns. The courtyard where she bathes is her own, surrounded by walls that should shield her from curious eyes, protected by the natural order that respects the boundaries of home and hearth. The ritual begins with prayer, as all sacred acts should. Bathsheba lifts her voice in quiet thanksgiving for the day's blessings, for water that cleanses and herbs that heal, for a home that provides shelter, and a husband who provides protection. Her words rise like incense toward heaven, simple and sincere, the honest gratitude of a woman who knows both comfort and its source. She loosens her hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. The day's careful arrangement gives way to natural beauty, to the simple grace that needs no ornament beyond what God has provided. Her movements are unhurried, peaceful, those of a woman secure in her solitude and comfortable with the rhythms of daily devotion. The first touch of water against her skin brings a gentle shock of coolness, refreshing after the day's heat and activity. She pours it slowly, letting it cascade over her shoulders and down her arms, washing away not just the dust of Jerusalem's streets, but the invisible burdens that accumulate in any life, even one blessed with love and security. Water runs in rivulets across skin warmed by the sun and softened by olive oil, the golden liquid that is both Palestine's blessing and its most cherished export. The oil carries fragrances that speak of distant gardens and careful cultivation of olive groves that have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms while continuing to yield their precious harvest year after year. Steam rises around her like a gentle cloud, creating a cocoon of warmth and moisture that seems to separate this moment from the ordinary flow of time. In this mist, Bathsheba becomes something more than merely human, a figure of beauty and grace caught between earth and heaven, between the common dust of daily life and the rare moments when creation reveals its original perfection. The bronze basin reflects not just her image, but fragments of the evening sky, broken patterns of light and shadow that dance with each movement of the water. Stars begin to appear in its surface, tiny points of light that seem to have fallen from heaven to rest in this humble vessel, transforming simple washing into something approaching worship. Water flows over hair that gleams like polished wood in the lamplight, dark and rich and heavy with its own weight. She works the moisture through each strand, careful and thorough, understanding that true cleanliness requires patience and attention to every detail. This is not vanity, but devotion, the proper care of gifts that come from the Creator's generous hand. The herbs in the water release their essences as she moves, creating a garden of scents that mingle and rise on the evening air. These are the same fragrances that filled Eden, the same gifts that grew in paradise before the fall brought sweat and toil to human labor. For these few moments, innocence seems restored, simplicity redeemed, creation returned to its intended harmony. Each gesture speaks of generations of women who have performed this same ritual, mothers and daughters connected across centuries by the common need for purification and renewal. In the water's embrace, Bathsheba joins herself to Eve and Sarah, to Miriam and Deborah, to all the daughters of promise who have found in simple water the mystery of cleansing and rebirth. The ritual nears its end, but the peace it brings lingers, like the steam that still rises from the basin's surface. Water that began as blessing becomes blessing multiplied, transformed by use into something that sanctifies not just the body but the spirit, not just the moment but the memory that will carry its grace forward into whatever tomorrow may bring. Above the courtyard walls, stars shine with increasing brightness as the last light fades from the western sky. The city settles into its nightly rhythm while oil lamps flicker behind shuttered windows. In this small space, surrounded by stone and protected by custom, a woman completes her evening prayers in water and silence, unaware that other eyes have found her solitude, that other hearts have been stirred by beauty meant for no one but her God. The message, morning light, filters through carved lattice windows in the Palace of David, casting intricate patterns on floors of polished stone. The king has risen early, as is his custom, to walk among his gardens and prepare his heart for another day of governing God's chosen people. But this morning brings a difference, a stirring in his spirit that he cannot quite name or dismiss. A servant appears at his chamber door, bowing low with the practiced grace of one who has learned to approach royalty. His voice carries carefully measured words, the tone of a man who understands that kings must be told things delicately, especially when those things concern the private lives of their subjects. "My lord the king," he begins, his eyes fixed on the floor rather than meeting David's gaze. "You asked about the woman you saw from the rooftop. Her name is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, wife of Uriah the Hittite. They dwell in the house with the courtyard that faces toward the palace." The information lands in David's ears like seeds falling on prepared ground. Each detail takes root immediately, growing into knowledge that feels both precious and dangerous. Bathsheba, even her name carries music, a sound that seems to echo in the chambers of his heart. Daughter of Eliam, who serves among his counselors. Wife of Uriah, who fights with honor in his armies. David dismisses the servant with a wave of his hand, but his mind cannot dismiss the image that has haunted him since the previous evening. Beauty has power, and he has felt that power stirring something within him that has long lain dormant. The loneliness of kingship, the weight of constant responsibility, the isolation that comes with wearing a crown, all of these have created an emptiness that beauty seems uniquely qualified to fill. He paces the length of his chamber, his feet finding familiar patterns in the stone, while his thoughts chase each other like shadows dancing in lamplight. Uriah the Hittite, one of his most trusted warriors, a man who chose to serve the God of Israel despite his foreign birth. A soldier currently camped with the army before the walls of Rabbah, fighting David's battles while David walks in safety behind palace walls. The king pauses at his window, looking out over the city that God has given him to govern. From this height, he can see the rooftops and courtyards, the daily life of his people spread below like a map written in stone and timber. Somewhere among those homes lives the woman whose image will not leave his thoughts, whose beauty has awakened something that kingship was supposed to satisfy. Another servant enters, this one bearing the morning's correspondence and the endless requests for royal attention that fill every day of David's reign. Governors write from distant provinces, judges seek guidance on difficult cases, and merchants request favorable terms for their enterprises. The business of the kingdom flows like a river that never stops, demanding constant navigation and frequent decisions. But today the papers seem to blur before David's eyes, their contents unable to compete with the vivid memory of water and lamplight, of grace caught in an unguarded moment. He tries to focus on the affairs of state, to remember the weight of responsibility that rests on his shoulders, but his thoughts drift like smoke toward the house where Bathsheba lives her quiet life, unaware of the storm brewing in a king's troubled heart. By midday, David has made his decision. He calls for his most trusted messenger, a man who has carried delicate communications before and knows how to deliver them with discretion. The king's words are carefully chosen, wrapped in the language of royal courtesy that conceals as much as it reveals. "Go to the house of Uriah the Hittite," David instructs, his voice steady despite the irregular beating of his heart. Tell his wife that the king requests her presence in the palace. Say that there is a matter of some importance that requires her attention, something connected to her husband's service in the army. Be gentle in your manner, but make it clear that this is a royal summons, not a mere invitation. The messenger bows deeply, understanding without words the delicate nature of his mission. He has served David long enough to recognize the signs of internal struggle, the battle between duty and desire that plays across the king's features like clouds moving across the sun. But his loyalty lies in obedience, not judgment, and he accepts the task without question or comment. "When should she come, my lord?" the messenger asks, his voice carefully neutral. "Tell her to come this evening, when the heat of the day has passed and the city grows quiet. Let her know that she will be received with all honor due to the wife of one of my faithful soldiers. And," David pauses, something in his conscience stirring like a warning bell, "tell her that she may bring a companion if she wishes, for propriety's sake." The messenger nods and withdraws, leaving David alone with the magnitude of what he has set in motion. The The message will be delivered within the hour, carried through Jerusalem's winding streets to a house where a woman tends her daily tasks, unaware that her life is about to change forever. The words will fall on her ears like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that will spread far beyond their point of impact. David returns to his window, but now the view seems different. The city below pulses with new significance, every roof and courtyard charged with possibility and peril. He has used his power to reach across the distance between palace and home, between king and subject, between desire and its object. The message is already traveling toward its destination, carrying with it consequences that no one can foresee. In the distance, barely visible through the afternoon haze, the mountains of Judah rise like ancient witnesses to all that unfolds beneath their silent peaks. They have watched over Israel since Abraham first entered this land, and they will watch still when all present troubles have passed into memory. But for now, they stand as mute observers while a king's message winds its way through narrow streets toward a woman who has no idea that her name has been whispered in the halls of power. The visit twilight paints Jerusalem in shades of purple and gold as Bathsheba makes her way through the palace gates, her footsteps echoing softly on stones worn smooth by countless royal processions. The guards bow respectfully as she passes, their eyes properly averted, their manner speaking of orders given to treat particular visitor with special care. Her heart beats rapidly beneath the simple but elegant robe she chose for this unexpected summons. The king's message had arrived like thunder from a clear sky, polite but unmistakably commanding, wrapped in language that offered no real choice despite its courteous phrasing. When kings call, subjects come, regardless of the questions that multiply in their minds like seeds scattered on fertile ground. A servant leads her through corridors lined with tapestries that tell the story of Israel's triumphs, past chambers where the business of the kingdom unfolds in whispered conferences and careful deliberations. The palace seems to hum with quiet energy, the accumulated power of a people finally at peace under a king who has proven his worth in battle and his wisdom in governance. She is brought to a private chamber, smaller than the great throne room, but no less impressive in its appointments. Cedar panels gleam in the light of golden lamps, while precious stones set into the walls catch and reflect the dancing flames. This is clearly a place where David conducts his more personal business, where the formal requirements of kingship give way to the kind of conversations that shape the deeper currents of royal decision-making. David enters quietly, and Bathsheba immediately understands why this man has inspired such devotion from his followers. Even without crown or royal robes, he carries himself with the unconscious authority of one born to lead. His eyes hold depths forged by years of struggle and triumph, while his presence fills the room with the kind of magnetic force that draws others into its orbit without effort or artifice. "Please, be seated," he says, his voice carrying the warmth that has made him beloved by his people. "I hope the journey from your home was not difficult. I wanted to speak with you about your husband's service, to express personally my gratitude for his loyalty and courage." Bathsheba takes the offered chair, her hands folded carefully in her lap, her eyes respectfully lowered in the presence of royal authority. "My lord honors me by this attention," she replies, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Uriah has spoken often of his devotion to the king and his gratitude for the privilege of serving in your armies. They speak of Uriah's military record, of the recent campaigns that have extended Israel's borders and secured her neighbors' respect. David's knowledge of individual soldiers impresses her. He knows not just the major battles, but the smaller actions where men like her husband have proven their worth." The conversation flows easily, revealing the genuine care that David feels for those who serve under his command. But beneath the surface courtesies, other currents move like underground streams seeking their outlet. David's eyes, when they meet hers, carry a intensity that has nothing to do with military matters. Bathsheba recognizes the look, though she has never seen it directed toward her with such royal authority behind it. She finds herself caught between proper deference and a growing awareness of dangerous ground. "Your husband is fortunate in his wife," David says, the conversation taking a subtle turn toward more personal territory. Beauty and virtue are rare enough separately, but to find them combined. He lets the sentence drift unfinished, its implications hanging in the air like incense. Bathsheba feels heat rise in her cheeks, a flush that speaks both of modesty and recognition of the precipice on which she now stands. "The king is gracious," she murmurs, choosing her words with the care of one who senses that every syllable carries weight beyond its surface meaning. The evening deepens around them, and servants light additional lamps that cast dancing shadows on the chamber walls. The isolation of this moment grows more pronounced with each passing minute, the awareness that they are alone together in a space where ordinary rules seem suspended by royal prerogative. David moves closer, ostensibly to pour wine from a golden pitcher, but his proximity sends waves of awareness through Bathsheba's carefully composed exterior. She can smell the cedar oil in his hair, catch the scent of frankincense that clings to his robes, feel the warmth that radiates from his presence like heat from a banked fire. "I confess," David says, his voice dropping to tones meant for her ears alone, "that my interest goes beyond your husband's service. Since I saw you from my rooftop, I have been unable to think of anything else." Beauty such as yours seems to speak of divine artistry, of God's special care in his creation. The words fall between them like stones dropped into deep water, their impact rippling outward in circles of implication and consequence. Bathsheba understands with sudden clarity that this meeting was never about Uriah's military record, that the message calling her here carried purposes that had nothing to do with the reasons given. "My lord," she says carefully, her voice barely above a whisper, "I am honored by your attention, but I am a married woman, bound by sacred vows before God and man." David's hand touches hers briefly, a contact that seems to burn despite its gentleness. "I am the king," he says simply, as if that title carries power to transform moral absolutes into negotiable boundaries. "What I desire, I can command. What I command becomes right by virtue of my commanding it." The chamber seems to hold its breath, waiting for her response to this declaration that reshapes the moral landscape by royal decree. Bathsheba feels the weight of centuries pressing down on this moment, the accumulated wisdom of mothers and grandmothers who have faced similar choices, similar pressures from men who mistake power for righteousness. Yet she also feels the terrible isolation of her position, the crushing reality that refusal might bring consequences not just for herself, but for Uriah, whose life depends on royal favor and military assignment. The mathematics of power are simple and brutal. Kings who are denied what they desire often find ways to eliminate the sources of their frustration. "The king's will is not to be questioned," she says finally, the words coming like drops of blood squeezed from a wound. Her submission carries the weight of inevitability, the recognition that some battles cannot be won, only endured with whatever dignity circumstances allow. David's victory tastes of ashes even as he claims it. He has used his authority to overcome resistance that honor should have strengthened, employed the power given him to protect his people in service of desires that diminish both himself and his office. The shepherd boy who once refused to kill his persecutor now uses royal privilege to take what belongs to another. The evening stretches toward its conclusion with the heavy inevitability of tragedy, each moment weighted with consequences that will echo through generations yet unborn. In the golden lamplight of David's private chamber, two souls meet at the intersection of power and vulnerability, of royal prerogative and human frailty, setting in motion events that will test the very foundations of God's covenant with his chosen people. The letter morning arrives in Jerusalem with unusual weight, as if the very air carries the burden of secrets that darkness could not contain. Bathsheba wakes in her own bed, but the familiar surroundings feel strange now, marked by the invisible transformation that a single evening can work in a human life. The woman who returns home is not quite the same as the one who left at the king's summons. She moves through her morning tasks with mechanical precision, drawing water from the well, lighting the cooking fire, preparing the simple meal that marks the beginning of another day. Her hands perform their accustomed duties while her mind struggles to process what has occurred, to find some way of understanding how her quiet life has become entangled with the complicated desires of kings. The other women at the well greet her with their usual warmth, sharing news of children and husbands, discussing the small dramas that fill their days with meaning and purpose. Bathsheba responds appropriately, but her words feel hollow, as if spoken by someone else. She has crossed a boundary that cannot be uncrossed, entered territory from which there is no simple return. Days pass with their natural rhythm, but beneath the surface of ordinary life, Bathsheba watches and waits with growing certainty. Her body carries its own calendar, its own careful measurement of time and consequence. When the expected signs fail to appear, when the monthly rhythm that has marked her adult life falls silent, she knows with the ancient wisdom of women what this silence means. The realization comes not as shock, but as the confirmation of what some deeper part of her has been expecting. Lives do not intersect with royal power without leaving permanent traces, without creating consequences that ripple outward like stones dropped in still water. The child growing within her is living proof of an evening that both will wish had never occurred. She sits in her courtyard as evening approaches, watching shadows lengthen across the stones where she performed her ritual bathing, where innocence was lost to the complicated mathematics of power and desire. The space that once felt sacred now seems marked by memory, transformed into a place where past and present intersect in ways both beautiful and terrible. The decision to send word to David does not come easily. For days she wrestles with alternatives, searching for some other path that might avoid the dangerous territory ahead. But pregnancy is not a condition that can be hidden indefinitely, and secrets have a way of demanding acknowledgement, whether or not their keepers are ready to provide it. She writes the letter herself, her careful script forming words that will shatter whatever peace David has managed to construct around their shared transgression. The message is brief, almost brutal in its simplicity. I am with child. No explanations, no accusations, no requests for action. Just the stark fact that will force the king to confront consequences he surely never intended to create. A trusted servant carries the letter through Jerusalem's winding streets, bearing news that will rock the foundations of the palace and test the character of the man who sits on Israel's throne. The message seems small and innocent as it travels toward its destination, but its contents carry the power to topple kingdoms and destroy the carefully constructed narratives that allow powerful men to sleep peacefully. David receives the letter in his private study, surrounded by the scrolls and maps that chronicle Israel's expansion and prosperity. The words leap from the parchment like living things, each letter burning itself into his consciousness with the force of divine judgment. He reads the message again and again, hoping to find some alternative meaning in its carefully chosen phrases. But there is no escape in interpretation, no refuge in wishful thinking. The child that grows in Bathsheba's womb is the physical manifestation of choices that cannot be undone, decisions that have created a crisis requiring immediate action. The king who once faced giants with confidence now finds himself confronting an enemy that cannot be defeated with sword or sling. David crumples the letter in his fist, then smooths it out again, as if the physical treatment of the message might somehow alter its contents. The chamber that moments before felt like a sanctuary now seems like a trap, its walls closing in around secrets that demand resolution. Outside his window, Jerusalem continues its daily routine, unaware that its king faces the kind of moral crisis that can destroy both ruler and realm. He paces the length of his study, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences, searching for some solution that might preserve both his throne and his reputation. The mathematics of royal scandal are complex and unforgiving. Kings who father children outside of marriage face questions that go far beyond personal morality, challenges that strike at the very heart of their authority to rule. The letter lies on his table like an accusation waiting for an answer, its silent presence demanding action that David is not yet ready to take. But time moves forward with relentless certainty, and pregnant women cannot hide their condition indefinitely. Decisions must be made, plans must be formed, consequences must be managed before they manage themselves. In the growing darkness of his chamber, surrounded by the trappings of power that now seem more burden than blessing, David begins to consider options that a shepherd boy would never have contemplated. The crown that once felt like divine blessing now weighs like a curse, forcing choices between honor and survival, between righteousness and political necessity. The soldier returns. The road from Rabbah stretches dusty and long beneath the feet of travel-weary soldiers, but none more weary than Uriah the Hittite as he makes his unexpected journey back to Jerusalem. The king's summons had come suddenly, plucking him from the siege lines where he served with distinction among David's mighty men. No explanation accompanied the royal command, only the urgent instruction to present himself at the palace with all possible speed. His fellow soldiers gathered around as he prepared to leave, clapping him on the shoulder and offering theories about why the king might need him in Jerusalem. Perhaps a promotion awaited or assignment to some special mission that required his particular skills. Uriah accepted their congratulations with the quiet dignity that marked all his actions. But privately, he wondered what could be so urgent as to call a soldier from active duty. The journey gives him time to think, time to wonder about the wife he left behind in their modest home near the palace walls. Bathsheba's face fills his thoughts as his feet find their rhythm on the familiar path, her gentle smile and quiet strength sustaining him through the long miles between battlefield and city. War teaches men to treasure what they have left behind, to hold tight to memories of love and peace when surrounded by violence and death. Jerusalem rises before him like a dream made manifest in stone and cedar, its walls catching the afternoon sun and throwing back light that seems to welcome him home. The guards at the gate recognize him immediately, their faces brightening with genuine pleasure at seeing one of their own return safely from the field. News travels quickly in military circles, and Uriah's reputation for courage and loyalty precedes him wherever he goes. He makes his way through familiar streets toward the palace, noting the prosperity that marks David's reign. Merchants display their wares with confidence, children play in streets free from the fear of raiders, and women draw water from wells without posting guards. This is what they fight for, this peace that allows normal life to flourish under the protection of David's expanding kingdom. The palace guards escort him through corridors he has walked before, past chambers where the business of the realm unfolds in conferences and consultations. But today feels different somehow, charged with an undercurrent of tension that Uriah cannot quite identify. Servants move with unusual urgency, and the very air seems thick with unspoken concerns. David receives him in the same private chamber where, unknown to Uriah, his wife sat just days before. The king rises from his chair with a warmth that seems forced, his smile not quite reaching eyes that carry shadows deeper than those cast by recent military campaigns. Something troubles the man who has led Israel to unprecedented heights of power and prosperity. Uriah, my faithful friend, David says, his voice carrying genuine affection mixed with something else, something that sounds almost like guilt. How goes the siege of Rabbah? Are the men in good spirits? Do they have everything they need for victory? They speak of military matters with the easy familiarity of warriors who have shared both triumph and defeat. Uriah reports on the progress of the siege, the morale of the troops, the strategic challenges that face the army in reducing the Ammonite stronghold. David listens attentively, asking detailed questions that demonstrate his continued concern for the soldiers who fight in his name. But beneath the surface of professional discussion, Uriah senses currents he cannot identify. David's questions seem to probe beyond mere military interest, searching for something that has little to do with siege engines and battle plans. The king's manner suggests a man wrestling with problems that extend far beyond the conquest of enemy cities. "You have traveled far today," David says eventually, his tone shifting toward the personal. "Go down to your house, wash your feet, and rest with your wife. You have earned this respite from the hardships of campaign life." The suggestion seems reasonable, even thoughtful, but something in David's delivery raises questions in Uriah's mind. Why this sudden concern for his personal comfort? Why the specific mention of his wife? The king's words carry an urgency that seems disproportionate to the circumstances, as if this particular homecoming carries weight beyond normal military courtesy. "My lord is gracious," Uriah replies carefully, studying David's face for clues to this unexpected attention. "But if I may ask, why have I been called from the field? Is there some special service the king requires of me?" David's hesitation lasts only a moment, but Uriah catches it, filing away this small sign of internal struggle for future consideration. "Nothing urgent," the king says finally. "I simply wanted to hear first-hand reports from the siege, to ensure that our forces have everything they need for success." The explanation satisfies the requirements of royal courtesy, but leaves deeper questions unanswered. Uriah has served David long enough to recognize when his king is troubled, when the weight of leadership presses heavily on shoulders that have borne it with such distinction. Something more than military concern drives this unexpected summons, though its nature remains hidden. As he prepares to leave the palace, Uriah carries with him the strange impression that this meeting has been as much about what was not said as what was discussed. David's manner suggested a man testing waters whose depth he could not measure, probing for responses to questions he dared not ask directly. The streets of Jerusalem welcome him with their familiar sounds and scents, but even here, the sense of something unfinished, something not quite right, follows him like a shadow. Home lies just ahead, where Bathsheba waits with the quiet patience that has sustained their marriage through the long separations that military service demands. But as Uriah walks toward his house, he cannot shake the feeling that he returns to a city somehow changed, to a situation more complex than the simple homecoming it appears to be. The king's summons has brought him back to Jerusalem, but the reasons for that summons remain as mysterious as the troubled shadows that cloud David's usually confident demeanor. A loyal heart, twilight settles over Jerusalem as Uriah makes his way through the palace gates. But instead of turning toward home and the embrace of his waiting wife, he seeks out the quarters where David's household guard maintains their watch. The other soldiers look up in surprise as he approaches, their faces breaking into grins of welcome for a comrade returned from the field. "Uriah!" one calls out, rising from his position by the guardhouse door. "What brings you back to the city? Don't tell me the siege of Rabbah has ended already." He settles among them with the easy familiarity of shared service, accepting their offers of food and wine while explaining his unexpected recall to Jerusalem. The conversation flows naturally from military matters to the small details of palace life, the kind of talk that binds soldiers together regardless of their current assignment. "Surely you're not planning to spend the night here," another guard observes, noting how Uriah makes no move to leave as the evening deepens. "Your wife must be waiting for your return. The king himself suggested you go home to rest." Uriah's response comes slowly, weighted with the kind of conviction that marks all his decisions. "How can I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife when the ark of God and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field? As surely as you live, and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing." The words fall into the evening quiet like stones dropped into deep water, their ripples spreading outward to touch every man present. Here is loyalty distilled to its essence, honor so pure it requires no explanation or defense. While his comrades sleep under stars and face enemy arrows, Uriah will not indulge in comforts they cannot share. The other guards nod slowly, recognizing in their friend's declaration something that elevates all of them. This is why they follow David, why they serve Israel, not for personal gain, but for principles that transform ordinary men into instruments of divine purpose. In Uriah's simple refusal to enjoy what others cannot, they see reflected their own highest aspirations. A messenger arrives from the palace, bearing word that David wishes to see him again. Uriah rises immediately, brushing dust from his simple tunic and checking that his weapons are properly secured. The king's summons must be answered promptly, regardless of the hour or the circumstances of its delivery. He finds David waiting in the same chamber where their earlier conversation unfolded, but now the king's manner carries a different energy. Wine has been prepared, rich fare spreads across a low table, and David's greeting holds a warmth that seems designed to draw Uriah into relaxation and confidence. "I have been thinking about our conversation," David says, pouring wine into golden cups. "You serve faithfully in difficult conditions, and it occurs to me that we have not properly honored your dedication. Sit, eat, drink. Let us speak as friends rather than king and subject. The wine is excellent, pressed from grapes grown in the hill country of Judah and aged in the palace cellars until it reached perfect maturity. David pours generously, his own cup matching Uriah's measure for measure, as they share the kind of meal that speaks of royal favor and personal regard. They talk of campaigns past and future, of the men who serve under both their commands, of the strategic challenges that face any army seeking to extend Israel's borders. David's questions probe gently into Uriah's personal circumstances, his plans for the future, his hopes for the family he might someday raise in the peace their victories have purchased. The conversation stretches long into the night, sustained by wine and the easy fellowship that can develop between men who share the burdens of leadership. David's manner grows increasingly relaxed, his laughter more frequent, his stories more personal. Yet, underneath the surface warmth, Uriah senses the same undercurrent of tension that marked their earlier meeting. "You have drunk deeply tonight, my friend," David observes as the evening reaches its natural conclusion. "Perhaps it would be wise to go home now, to rest in comfort, rather than returning to the hard benches of the guardhouse." The suggestion carries the weight of royal recommendation, but Uriah's response comes without hesitation. "My lord, the wine has been excellent and the conversation even better, but my resolution remains unchanged. While my brothers sleep in tents before Rabbah, I will not lie on a soft bed in Jerusalem." David's face shows a flicker of something. Disappointment, perhaps, or frustration carefully controlled. But he recovers quickly, his royal composure smoothing over whatever emotions briefly disturbed his surface calm. "You are a man of remarkable principle," he says, and the words carry both admiration and something that might be regret. Uriah bows deeply before taking his leave, his steps steady despite the wine he has consumed. Principle runs deeper than physical comfort in his character, loyalty stronger than any temporary pleasure the king might offer. He returns to the guardhouse where his fellow soldiers welcome him back with knowing smiles. "The king tried to send you home again?" one asks, reading the situation correctly. "He did," Uriah confirms, settling onto his simple bedroll with the satisfaction of a man whose conscience remains undisturbed. But some things matter more than personal comfort. Above him, stars wheel across the Jerusalem sky, the same constellations that shine down on the siege lines where his comrades maintain their watch. In choosing to share their hardship rather than enjoy his temporary privilege, Uriah demonstrates the kind of integrity that makes ordinary men extraordinary, the loyalty that binds armies together and kingdoms endure. But his very virtue has become, unknown to him, a problem requiring solution. In the palace above, a king paces his chamber and contemplates measures that honor demands, but wisdom fears, choices that will test the foundations of everything he claims to believe about justice, mercy, and the terrible responsibilities of power. The wine and the weight. David paced the marble floors of his private chamber. The oil lamps flickered against the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mirror his restless thoughts. Outside, Jerusalem slept under a blanket of stars. But sleep would not come to the king tonight. Uriah had returned from battle, dusty and tired, yet he would not go home. The simple soldier had thwarted David's careful plan with nothing more than honor. Such a small word, honor. Yet it had the power to unravel kingdoms. The king called for his servants. "Prepare a feast," he commanded softly. "Send word to Uriah. Tell him his king wishes to dine with him tonight." Within the hour, the soldier arrived, tunners. He had washed the dust from his face and hands, but his clothes still bore the marks of the battlefield. David greeted him with warmth that felt strange on his tongue. "Sit with me, faithful Uriah. You have served me well on the front lines. Tonight you deserve comfort and rest." The table groaned under the weight of roasted lamb, fresh bread, and fruits from the royal gardens. But it was the wine that David poured most generously. Cup after cup, he filled Uriah's goblet with the finest vintage from his cellars. "Tell me of the siege," David said, his voice casual. "How fares my general Joab? Do our men have all they need?" Uriah spoke of trenches and walls, of brave men and difficult days. His words came slowly at first, then faster as the wine loosened his tongue. David listened and nodded, all the while watching, waiting. The night deepened. The wine flowed like a gentle river between them. David shared stories of his own battles, tales from his youth when he too had slept under the stars with sword and shield as his only companions. Those were simpler times, the king mused, swirling wine in his cup. A man knew his enemies then. They came at you with spears, not riddles. Uriah's eyes grew heavy with drink and warmth. His shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. My lord speaks truly. War is cleaner than peace sometimes. In battle, you know where you stand. David leaned forward. And where do you stand tonight, my friend? Surely not in my palace when your own bed waits for you at home. Your wife must wonder where her husband has gone. A shadow crossed Uriah's face, and he straightened despite the wine. My lord, the ark of Israel and the men of Judah dwell in tents. My commander Joab and all the king's servants camp in the open field. How can I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. The words hung in the air like incense, heavy and sacred. David felt them settle in his chest like stones. Even drunk, even weary, Uriah would not bend. The king tried once more. Stay another day then. Rest here in comfort. Tomorrow you can return to your duties with renewed strength. But David knew it was useless. He could pour rivers of wine, offer mountains of gold, speak with honey or thunder. Uriah's heart was made of different stuff than other men. His loyalty ran deeper than convenience, stronger than temptation. As the soldier departed that night, walking steadily despite the wine, David watched from his window. The man's silhouette moved through the courtyard like a specter of his own conscience. Each step echoed in the king's mind, marking time toward some terrible conclusion. The servants cleared away the remains of the feast. Empty cups and picked clean bones told the story of a night that had solved nothing. David dismissed them all with a wave of his hand. Alone in his chamber, the king sat in darkness. The oil lamps had burned low, their flames dancing their final dance before death. In the dying light, David's face looked older, marked by lines that had not been there at sunset. He thought of Bathsheba, waiting in her chamber. Did she pace as he paced? Did sleep flee from her as it fled from him? The child growing within her was both promise and threat, life and judgment wrapped in flesh and blood. Tomorrow would bring new choices, darker paths. Tonight had shown him that honor could not be bought with wine or kindness. Some men simply would not be moved. In the morning, he would have to try different means. The last lamp guttered out, leaving the king alone with his thoughts and the weight of what was to come. The letter to Joab dawn came soft and gray over Jerusalem, but David had not slept. He sat at his writing desk, reed pen in hand, a piece of parchment spread before him like an altar of sacrifice. The words came slowly, each one weighted with consequence. This was no ordinary message to his general. This letter would carry death in its sealed folds, wrapped in the language of strategy and war. To Joab, commander of my armies, greetings, David began. His hand moved steady across the parchment, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle and retire from him, that he may be struck down and die. The king paused, staring at the words he had written. Black ink on white parchment. Simple marks that would end a life. He could still stop this. He could tear the parchment, throw it in the fire, find another way. But what other way was there? The child would come regardless. Questions would follow. The kingdom would whisper. His reign, built on righteousness and the favor of God, would crumble into scandal and shame. David sealed the letter with his royal ring, pressing the wax until his emblem was clear and deep. The Lion of Judah looked back at him from the red seal, its mouth open in what might have been a roar or a scream. He called for Uriah. The soldier came quickly, as he always did when summoned. His armor was clean, his weapons sharp. He had spent the night at the king's gate with the servants, true to his word. While other men slept in soft beds, Uriah had chosen the hard ground. My faithful friend, David said, his voice steady as stone, I have urgent dispatches for Joab, but will you carry them swiftly to the battlefield? Uriah bowed low. Of course, my lord, I am ready to depart immediately. David handed him the sealed letter. The parchment looked innocent enough, rolled tight and bound with ribbon. No one would guess it carried a death sentence written in the hand of the condemned man's own king. Tell Joab I await his quick action on these matters, David said. The success of our siege depends on bold moves and careful strategy. Uriah tucked the letter safely in his leather pouch. It will be done, my lord. Joab will have your words before the sun reaches its peak. They stood there for a moment, king and soldier, bound by loyalty that only one of them understood was already broken. David wanted to speak, to warn him somehow, to take back the letter and find courage for a different choice. Instead, he placed his hand on Uriah's shoulder. You have served me well, friend. Your faithfulness will not be forgotten. Uriah smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. My lord is too generous. I do only what any soldier should do for his king and his God. With that, he was gone. David watched from his window as the man mounted his horse and rode through the palace gates. The morning sun caught the metal of his armor, turning him bright as a torch against the dusty road. The king remained at the window long after Uriah had disappeared from sight. Jerusalem was waking around him. Merchants opened their stalls, children played in the streets, priests prepared for the morning sacrifices. Life continued its ancient rhythm, oblivious to the poison that now traveled toward the battlefield. David thought of Joab, his general and nephew, who had served him through countless battles. Joab would read the letter and understand immediately. He would ask no questions, show no surprise. The commander had seen enough of war and politics to know that kings sometimes required ugly solutions to impossible problems. The irony cut deep. Uriah would deliver his own death warrant with the same faithfulness he brought to every task. He would place it in Joab's hands and await orders, never knowing that the orders would send him to his grave. In the distance, a dove called to its mate. The sound drifted through the window like a lament, soft and mournful. David closed his eyes and listened until the song faded into silence. The letter was gone now beyond recall. The wheel had been set in motion, and only God could stop it from turning. The king who had once faced giants with nothing but a sling now trembled before the consequences of his own choosing. The battle, though. The siege walls rose like broken teeth around the ancient city. For weeks, Joab's men had pressed closer, digging trenches and building towers, playing the patient game of war that would eventually starve their enemies to surrender. The morning sun painted the battlefield in shades of bronze and shadow. Soldiers moved with practiced quiet, checking weapons and armor before the day's assault. The air smelled of dust and leather, sweat and metal, the familiar perfume of campaigns that stretched too long. Joab read the king's letter one more time before rolling it carefully and tucking it away. The parchment felt heavier than it should, weighted with implications that needed no explanation. He had served David long enough to understand the language of necessity. The general found Uriah sharpening his sword near the supply tents. The soldier looked up with bright eyes, eager for orders. Uriah, Joab said quietly, I have special work for you today. The plan was simple, as the deadliest plans often are. The enemy's strongest point jutted out from their wall like a stone finger pointing toward the siege lines. It bristled with archers and spearmen, defended by their finest warriors. Any attack there would be costly and probably doomed. We'll make a feint against their weak eastern gate, Joab explained to his captains. While they rush to defend it, a small force will strike the stronghold, create confusion, draw their attention, then pull back quickly. The other officers nodded. They had done such things before. Diversions and deceptions were the tools of successful generals. Only Joab knew this feint would become something else entirely. The morning attack began as planned. Horns sounded and men charged toward the eastern gate with ladders and shields. The defenders responded predictably, pouring fighters toward the apparent threat. Meanwhile, Uriah led his small band toward the stronghold. 20 men, no more, armed with swords and courage. They moved like shadows across the broken ground, using rubble and abandoned siege works for cover. The stronghold loomed above them, its walls scarred by weeks of unsuccessful assault. Arrows began to fall like deadly rain as the defenders spotted their approach. Forward, forward, Uriah called, his voice carrying over the clash of metal and stone. For David and for Israel, his men followed without question. They trusted their captain, trusted his judgment, trusted that he would not lead them into needless death. They could not know that death was precisely where they were being led. The assault was brave and hopeless. Uriah's warriors threw themselves against stones that would not yield, against odds that could not be overcome. They fought with the fury of men who believed their cause was just, their mission vital. One by one they fell. Uriah stood longest, his sword flashing in the morning sun as he carved space around himself with skill and desperation. An arrow took his shoulder, then another found his thigh. Still he fought, calling encouragement to his remaining men, refusing to yield ground that could not be held. The final arrow found its mark between the plates of his armor. Uriah staggered, looked down at the wooden shaft protruding from his chest, and smiled with something that might have been relief. "Tell my wife," he whispered to the dust, but there was no one left to hear. From his position on the siege lines, Joab watched the stronghold swallow the last of Uriah's band. The diversionary attack at the eastern gate was already pulling back, its purpose served. The enemy would count this morning as a victory, driving off two separate assaults. They would never know they had been used as instruments of a king's desperate plan. Joab felt no satisfaction in the success of his orders. Uriah had been a good soldier, perhaps the best of soldiers. His death would leave a hole in the ranks that would be hard to fill. But kings must be obeyed, even when their commands taste like poison. The general called for his scribe. There were reports to write, messages to send. David would be waiting for word, though he already knew what that word would be. The letter had been delivered, its contents fulfilled with the precision of a prayer. As the sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the battlefield, burial details moved among the fallen. They worked with reverent efficiency, preparing the dead for their final rest. Uriah's body was recovered with full honors, his weapons cleaned, his armor straightened. He would return to Jerusalem as a hero, a faithful soldier who had died in service to his king. The truth of his death would be buried with him, known only to God and the men who had written it in blood and deception. The siege continued, patient and grinding. Walls would eventually fall, cities would surrender, victories would be won. But some victories carry the seeds of their own judgment, growing in darkness until the harvest comes. The messenger. The road from the battlefield to Jerusalem stretched like a dusty ribbon under the afternoon sun. A single rider pushed his horse hard along the familiar path, his saddlebags heavy with dispatches, and his heart heavier still with the news he carried. The messenger was young, chosen for his speed and discretion. Joab had selected him carefully, knowing that some messages required more than quick delivery. They needed silence, understanding, and the wisdom to know which truths were meant for which ears. As Jerusalem's walls came into view, the rider slowed his pace. The city rose before him like a promise carved from stone, its towers catching the golden light of late day. Smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily skyward, and the sounds of evening commerce echoed from the markets below. This was the heart of the kingdom, the place where David ruled with wisdom and justice, or so the people believed. The messenger carried knowledge that might crack the foundation of that belief if it ever found its way beyond the palace walls. At the city gates, guards recognized the royal colors on his saddlecloth and waved him through without question. His horse's hooves rang against the paved streets as he climbed toward the palace, past houses where families gathered for their evening meals, past shops closing for the day, past temples where priests prepared for sunset prayers. The palace courtyard buzzed with its usual activity. Servants hurried on their errands. Officials discussed matters of state in hushed groups. Musicians tuned their instruments for the evening's entertainment. The messenger dismounted and handed his reins to a stable boy, his movements sharp with purpose. "I carry urgent dispatches for the king," he told the guards at the palace entrance, "from General Joab at the siege." Word spread quickly through the corridors. David would want news from the battlefield immediately. The young man was escorted through passages lined with precious tapestries and burning torches, his sandals silent on the polished floors. He found the king in his private study, surrounded by scrolls and tablets. The business of ruling spread across tables like the pieces of some vast puzzle. David looked up as the messenger entered, and something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Hope? Resignation? "My lord," the young man said, dropping to one knee, "General Joab sends his report on today's battle." David's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for the sealed parchment. He broke the wax with his ring and unrolled the message, his eyes moving quickly across the lines of careful script. Joab had written with military precision, recounting the morning's action in terms that would satisfy any curious reader. The diversionary attack on the eastern gate had proceeded as planned. The assault on the stronghold had been valiant but unsuccessful. Casualties were moderate overall, but several good men had been lost, among them Uriah the Hittite. The messenger watched David's face as he read, but the king's expression revealed nothing. Years of ruling had taught him to hide his thoughts behind a mask of royal composure. "Tell me the details," David said quietly. "How did our men conduct themselves?" The young man had rehearsed this moment during his long ride. "They fought with great courage, my lord. The assault on the stronghold was particularly fierce. Captain Uriah led his men with exceptional bravery. He fell only when the position became impossible to hold." David nodded slowly. "He was a faithful soldier. His loss will be felt throughout the army." "General Joab asked me to convey his personal sorrow at Uriah's death," the messenger continued. "He said the captain died as he lived, in service to his king and his God." The words hung in the air like incense, sweet with honor and heavy with irony. David set the parchment aside and rose from his chair, walking to the window that looked out over his city. "Has word been sent to his wife?" the king asked, his back still turned. "Not yet, my lord. General Joab wished to inform you first, as is proper." David was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "I will see that Bathsheba receives the news appropriately. A king's soldier deserves a king's attention to his widow." The messenger bowed again. His part in this tragedy was nearly finished. Soon he would return to the battlefield, carrying new orders and supplies, leaving the palace to deal with the consequences of the day's work. But first, there was one more stop to make. The house where Bathsheba waited was not far from the palace, close enough for convenience, but distant enough for discretion. The messenger had been instructed to speak with her directly, so to ensure she understood her husband's fate before rumors and gossip could distort the truth. He knocked softly on her door as the first stars appeared overhead. When Bathsheba opened it, her face already knew what he had come to tell her. Perhaps it was his expression or the way he held his shoulders, or simply the instinct that comes to women who love warriors. "My lady," he said gently, "I bring word from the siege. Your husband fought bravely today, but he has fallen in service to the king." Bathsheba received the news in silence, her hands folded carefully before her. She asked no questions about the details of his death, made no demands for explanation. She simply nodded and thanked the messenger for his service. As he walked away through the empty streets, the young man wondered at her composure. Most widows would weep or rage or demand to know why their husbands had to die. But Bathsheba had simply accepted the news like one who had been expecting it. Perhaps she understood something about the nature of service, about the price that loyalty could demand. Or perhaps she knew more about her husband's death than she revealed. Either way, the message had been delivered. The wheel of consequence continued its ancient turn, grinding toward whatever judgment awaited them all. The mourning Bathsheba closed the door behind the messenger and leaned against it, her hands pressed flat against the smooth wood. The silence of her house wrapped around her like a shroud, broken only by the soft whisper of oil lamps and the distant sounds of Jerusalem settling into night. Uriah was dead. The words echoed in her mind, but they felt strange and unreal, like something heard in a dream that fades with morning light. She had known this moment might come from the day she sent word to David about the child. Some part of her had been preparing for it, building walls around her heart that might contain the flood when it finally arrived. She moved through her house like a sleepwalker, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed to belong to another life. The bronze mirror where Uriah had watched her arrange her hair. The wooden chest where he kept his spare sandals and his personal scrolls. The cup he favored for morning wine, still sitting where he had left it weeks ago before riding off to war. Everything remained exactly as it had been, yet everything was changed. These were no longer the possessions of a living man, but the relics of memory, artifacts of a love that had ended with an arrow on a distant battlefield. Bathsheba sank onto the bench beside her window and finally allowed the tears to come. They fell silently, tracking silver paths down her cheeks in the lamplight. She wept not just for Uriah, but for the innocence that had died with him, for the simple happiness they had shared before kings and kingdoms intruded on their small world. She remembered their wedding day, when he had been so nervous that his hands shook as he placed the ring on her finger. She remembered the way he sang while he worked in their garden, his voice rough but earnest. She remembered how he would hold her close on cold nights, his warrior's strength gentle as morning rain. Now he lay cold under foreign stars, his voice forever stilled, his hands that had known both sword and tenderness growing stiff in death. The child in her womb would never know its father's touch, would never hear his stories of battles and brotherhood, would grow up with only her memories to flesh out the shape of the man who had helped create it. As the night deepened, neighbors began to arrive. Word of Uriah's death spread through the streets like ripples on water, carrying sorrow from house to house. The women came first, bearing food and comfort, their own eyes bright with tears for a good man lost. "He died with honor," they murmured, embracing her carefully. "His name will be remembered among the brave." The men came too, soldiers who had served with Uriah, merchants who had known his honesty, elders who had respected his quiet faith. They filled her small house with their presence, turning private grief into public mourning. But even surrounded by friends and neighbors, Bathsheba felt utterly alone. They grieved for the Uriah they had known, the faithful soldier, the honest neighbor, the man who kept his word and honored his commitments. Only she knew the full cost of his faithfulness, the price his integrity had demanded. She could not tell them that his honor had sealed his doom. She could not explain that his refusal to compromise had made him dangerous to a king's secret. She could not reveal that the child she carried was both the cause and consequence of his death. So she accepted their comfort and held her silence, playing the role of the grieving widow while the truth burned like acid in her chest. The ritual requirements of mourning provided structure for the shapeless days that followed. There were clothes to tear, ashes to scatter in her hair, prayers to recite at appointed hours. The familiar ceremonies gave her grief a framework, a way to move through the terrible freedom that loss creates. 7 days she sat in sackcloth while friends and family came to share her sorrow. 7 days she ate the bread of mourning and drank the cup of tears. 7 days she listened to stories about Uriah's goodness, while knowing she could never tell the whole truth of his story. On the 8th day, the formal mourning ended. The neighbors returned to their own lives. The borrowed dishes were cleaned and returned. The house grew quiet again. Bathsheba washed the ashes from her hair and put on clean clothes, but the grief remained, settled in her bones like winter cold. She walked through her rooms and began the slow work of deciding what to keep and what to give away. Uriah's armor would go to a young soldier who could not afford his own. His tools would benefit a craftsman just starting his trade. His scrolls would find homes with scholars who would treasure them. But some things she could not bear to part with. His favorite cloak, which still held the faint scent of his skin. The small wooden horse he had carved during quiet evenings, its surface worn smooth by his hands. The ring he had worn on campaign, a simple band that had circled his finger through 100 battles. These she wrapped carefully and placed in the chest where she kept her most precious things. Someday, when the child was old enough to understand, these would help tell the story of the father who had died before birth could make him real. As night fell on that 8th day, Bathsheba stood again at her window, looking out over Jerusalem's lights. Somewhere in the palace, David waited. She knew he would come soon or send for her. The proprieties had been observed, the mourning completed according to law and custom. Soon she would trade this small house for palace chambers, this quiet grief for the complicated life of a king's wife. The child would be born into royalty instead of simplicity, surrounded by luxury and intrigue instead of honest love and faithful work. She placed her hand on her growing belly and felt the first flutter of movement, life quickening within her like a promise or a question. This child was Uriah's legacy, and David's future, innocent of the circumstances that had brought it into being, yet bound to carry the weight of both men's choices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new roles to play, new secrets to guard. But tonight, in the quiet house she had shared with a good man, Bathsheba allowed herself one last evening of pure grief, untainted by politics or calculation. She wept until no more tears would come, then slept the deep sleep of the utterly exhausted. In her dreams, Uriah was alive again, singing in their garden while she watched from the window, the golden light of memory making everything beautiful and whole. A new beginning. 3 months had passed since the mourning period ended. Jerusalem had grown accustomed to seeing Bathsheba in the palace corridors, her presence no longer causing whispers and turned heads. She moved through the royal household with quiet dignity, neither seeking attention nor hiding from it. The marriage ceremony had been small, private, more a matter of state documentation than celebration. David had arranged it with characteristic efficiency, ensuring that all legal requirements were met while avoiding the spectacle that might have raised uncomfortable questions about timing and motivation. Now, as autumn painted the hills around Jerusalem in shades of gold and amber, Bathsheba felt the child within her growing stronger each day. What had begun as subtle changes, a missed monthly cycle, morning queasiness, unusual fatigue, had become undeniably real. Her body was reshaping itself around this new life, creating space for the future to unfold. She stood in her chamber window, watching the city wake beneath the early morning sun. From this height, Jerusalem looked peaceful and ordered, its streets laid out like the lines of a scroll, its people moving with the purposeful rhythm of another ordinary day. But Bathsheba knew that appearances could deceive. Beneath the surface, calm, currents of ambition and jealousy swirled through the palace like underground streams. David's other wives watched her with eyes that held varying degrees of curiosity, resentment, and calculation. Some had welcomed her with genuine kindness, others with polite distance, still others with barely concealed hostility. She understood their feelings. A king's household was a delicate ecosystem where favor and position determined everything from daily comfort to future security. Her arrival had disrupted established patterns, raised new questions about inheritance and influence. The child she carried only complicated these dynamics. If it proved to be a son, he would have legitimate claims to consider alongside David's existing children. If a daughter, she might become a valuable piece in future marriage alliances. Either way, this baby represented change in a court where change was often dangerous. Bathsheba placed her hand on her rounded belly and felt the familiar flutter of movement. The child was active in the mornings, as if eager to greet each new day. She had begun to think of these moments as private conversations, silent exchanges between mother and unborn child that no one else could share or understand. "What world are you coming into, little one?" she whispered to the moving child. "What role will you play in the story that's already begun?" A soft knock interrupted her meditation. At her invitation, a young servant girl entered carrying a tray of morning bread, fruit, and watered wine. "The king sends his morning greetings," the girl said shyly. "He asks if you need anything for your comfort today." David's attentiveness had surprised everyone, including Bathsheba herself. He visited her chambers daily, inquired about her health, ensured she had everything necessary for her well-being. To outside observers, he appeared to be a devoted husband concerned for his wife's condition. Only Bathsheba wondered if his solicitude stemmed from genuine affection or careful political calculation. Perhaps both. David was too complex a man for simple motivations, too experienced a ruler to let personal feelings operate without regard for their public consequences. "Tell the king I am well," she replied to the servant girl. "All is as it should be." The girl bowed and withdrew, leaving Bathsheba alone with her breakfast and her thoughts. She broke bread slowly, savoring the simple pleasure of warm food on a cool morning. These quiet moments were precious to her, islands of peace in days that often felt shaped by forces beyond her control. A knock at the door announced another visitor. This time it was Nathan the prophet. Now his weathered face, kind but serious. She had grown to appreciate his visits over these past months. Unlike the courtiers and officials who spoke in carefully measured phrases, Nathan possessed a directness that could be refreshing or unsettling, depending on his message. "Good morning, my lady," he said, settling into the chair she offered. "You look well. The child agrees with you." "I pray so," she replied. "Each day brings new changes, new feelings. I never imagined how completely it would transform everything." Nathan nodded knowingly. Children have a way of rearranging the world around them before they even arrive. This one will be no different. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the morning light shift across the room. Nathan had an unusual gift for quiet presence, able to convey wisdom and comfort without need for constant words. "I've been thinking about names," Bathsheba said eventually. "If it's a son, David favors names that honor his lineage. If a daughter, something that speaks of beauty or grace." "Names carry power," Nathan observed. "They shape identity, create expectations, link the bearer to stories both old and new. Choose carefully." His words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. In the complex world of royal succession, even a name could have political implications. Sons with certain names might be seen as more legitimate heirs. Daughters with others might be valued more highly in marriage negotiations. "Sometimes I wonder if this child will be truly mine," Bathsheba admitted, "or if it will belong to the kingdom before it belongs to me." Nathan's eyes grew gentle. Every child belongs first to God, then to themselves, then to their parents. Kings and kingdoms come after. Remember that in the difficult days ahead. His phrase caught her attention. "Difficult days? Do you foresee trouble?" The prophet was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turned inward as if consulting some invisible source of knowledge. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of certainty mixed with sorrow. "This child will know both great blessing and great sorrow," he said quietly. "Like all children born into the currents of power, its life will be shaped by choices made before its birth. But it will also have the chance to make choices of its own, to write new chapters in an old story." Bathsheba felt a chill despite the warm morning air. "What do you mean? What choices? What sorrow?" But Nathan had already risen from his chair, his face kind but closed to further questions. "Trust in the goodness of God," he said simply. "Whatever comes, remember that love endures beyond understanding, and mercy flows deeper than human judgment." With that, he was gone, leaving Bathsheba alone with questions that had no answers and fears that had no names. She returned to her window, watching the city pulse with life below, while the child within her continued its restless movement. Somewhere in the palace, David was meeting with his advisors, making decisions that would ripple across the kingdom and into the future. Somewhere beyond Jerusalem's walls, armies marched and empires rose and fell, driven by the endless human hunger for power and security. But here, in this quiet chamber, a new life prepared for its entrance into an ancient world. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever sorrows the prophet had foreseen, this child would be born into love and hope and the eternal human belief that tomorrow might be better than today. Bathsheba pressed her hand to her belly once more and felt the answering pressure of a tiny foot or hand. This child was real, immediate, present in a way that transcended politics and prophecy. For now, that was enough. The future would right itself in time. Today, she would simply cherish the miracle of life growing within her and trust that love would prove stronger than the forces arrayed against it. Jedediah. The child arrived on a night when winter rain drummed against the palace windows like restless fingers seeking entrance. Bathsheba labored through the long hours before dawn, attended by the kingdom's finest midwives and supported by the prayers of women who understood the sacred mystery of birth. David paced the corridors outside her chamber, his usual composure cracked by anxiety that surprised even him. Kings were accustomed to waiting, for battles to be won, for emissaries to return, for the slow wheels of diplomacy to turn. But this waiting felt different, more personal, weighted with hope and fear in equal measure. When the baby's first cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness, it seemed to announce more than just another birth. This was the sound of consequences made flesh, of hidden choices stepping into the light, of the future arriving to claim its inheritance. The midwife emerged from the birth chamber with joy written across her weathered face. "A son, my lord," she announced, "strong and healthy, with a voice that will make itself heard." David felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully acknowledged until it released. A son, an heir, an heir. living proof that God's mercy could triumph over human failure, that new beginnings were possible even after the darkest chapters. He entered the chamber to find Bathsheba cradled in exhaustion and wonder, the baby nestled against her chest like a small miracle wrapped in soft cloth. The sight stopped him in the doorway, struck by the profound ordinariness of the scene. Despite all the palace intrigue and royal protocol, this moment belonged to the ancient rhythm of mother and child, as timeless and simple as love itself. "He's beautiful," David whispered, settling carefully beside them. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his tiny fists waving in the air as if already reaching for something beyond his grasp. Bathsheba looked up at her husband with eyes that held depths of feeling he was only beginning to understand. Joy, certainly, but also sorrow for the father who would never hold this child. Relief that the dangerous months of pregnancy had ended safely. Fear for what the future might demand of this innocent life. "He looks like you," she said softly, though in truth the baby looked like all newborns, ancient and new at once, carrying the mystery of where souls come from and what they're meant to become. David reached out tentatively, and Bathsheba placed the child in his arms. The baby's weight was surprisingly solid, his warmth immediate and real. David had held other newborn children, his own sons and daughters, the babies of servants and subjects who had sought royal blessing. But this felt different, charged with significance he couldn't fully name. "What shall we call him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They had discussed names during the long months of waiting, but somehow all those conversations seemed inadequate now. Names chosen in anticipation felt different when applied to an actual child, a real person who would carry whatever they decided for the rest of his life. Before Bathsheba could answer, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "His name is already chosen," Nathan said, stepping into the chamber with the quiet authority that always marked his prophetic pronouncements. David looked up, still holding the baby, his face questioning. The prophet's presence at this moment felt both natural and ominous. Nathan rarely appeared without purpose, and his purposes often carried divine weight that could reshape human plans. "The Lord has sent me with a message," Nathan continued, approaching the bed with reverent steps. "This child shall be called Jedediah, for he is beloved of the Lord." The name hung in the air like incense, sacred and strange. Jedediah, beloved of God. A name that spoke of divine favor, of special purpose, of a destiny that reached beyond ordinary human expectations. Bathsheba felt tears gather in her eyes. After months of uncertainty, weeks of worry about whether this child would survive the circumstances of its conception, here was God's own declaration of love and acceptance. The baby was not cursed for the sins that had brought him into being. He was beloved, chosen, blessed with a name that promised protection and purpose. "Jedediah," David repeated, tasting the syllables, feeling their weight. It was a beautiful name, heavy with meaning, but also a public name that would raise questions. People would want to know why the prophet had been moved to name this particular child, what made him special enough to warrant divine attention. But perhaps that was fitting. This child's existence had already disrupted the normal order of things. His very conception had set in motion events that had cost lives and changed kingdoms. It seemed appropriate that his naming should also carry prophetic significance. "Jedediah," Bathsheba whispered, reaching up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Beloved of the Lord." The child seemed to respond to his name, growing quiet in his father's arms, his dark eyes appearing to focus on the faces surrounding him. For a moment, the chamber filled with perfect peace, as if the presence of new life had the power to heal old wounds and silence ancient accusations. Nathan stepped closer, placing his weathered hand gently on the baby's forehead. "May the Lord bless you and keep you," he intoned softly. "May his face shine upon you and give you peace. May you grow in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man." The blessings settled over the child like a protective cloak, words of power spoken over innocence, promises of divine care whispered into uncertain future. Whatever trials lay ahead for this family, whatever consequences still awaited from choices already made, this child would carry God's love as his birthright. As dawnlight began to filter through the windows, servants arrived with news that the city was already buzzing with excitement. Word of the royal birth had spread through Jerusalem like ripples on water, carrying joy and speculation in equal measure. Soon, there would be official announcements, formal presentations, the elaborate ceremonies that mark the arrival of princes. But for now, in the quiet intimacy of the birth chamber, there was only a family discovering itself, a mother exhausted but radiant, a father awed by the weight of new responsibility, a child who had arrived carrying hope in his tiny hands. David returned the baby to Bathsheba's arms and watched as she settled him against her chest. The child's breathing grew regular and peaceful, the frantic energy of birth giving way to the deeper rhythms of new life finding its place in the world. "He will have a different path than we might have chosen," Bathsheba said quietly, her eyes never leaving her son's face. "Born into secrets, surrounded by consequences not of his making." "All children inherit the choices of their parents," David replied. "But they also have the power to make their own choices, to write their own stories. This one will have that chance." Nathan nodded approvingly. "The Lord's purposes are not always clear in the beginning," he said, "but they unfold in their proper time. This child carries blessing, not burden. Remember that in the days to come." The prophet withdrew as quietly as he had come, leaving the new family to begin learning the ancient dance of parent and child. Outside, Jerusalem continued its morning routine, but inside the palace chamber, everything had changed. Jedediah slept peacefully in his mother's arms, unaware that his birth had just written a new chapter in the long story of kings and kingdoms, of human failing and divine mercy, of love that endures beyond understanding. The child beloved of God had entered the world, bringing with him the promise that even the most complicated beginnings could lead to beautiful endings. The royal court spring arrived in Jerusalem with unusual warmth, painting the palace gardens in brilliant colors and filling the courtyards with the sound of running water and bird song. Jedediah was now several months old, a healthy baby who had begun to recognize faces and respond to voices with delighted gurgles and reaching hands. Bathsheba had settled into the rhythms of palace life with surprising grace. The initial awkwardness of her position as David's newest wife had given way to acceptance, helped by her natural dignity and the obvious devotion she showed to her child. The other royal wives had found their places in relation to her presence, some becoming genuine friends, others maintaining polite distance. She sat now in the women's courtyard, Jedediah on her lap, as he explored the fascinating texture of her silk sleeve. Around them, the daily life of the royal household continued its ancient patterns. Servants hurried on their errands, officials consulted in hushed voices, musicians practiced for the evening's entertainment. But beneath the surface calm, Bathsheba had learned to read the subtle currents that really govern palace life. David's court was a complex web of relationships, loyalties, ambitions, and careful calculations. Every conversation carried multiple layers of meaning. Every gesture was observed and interpreted. Every alliance shifted with the changing winds of royal favor. She had begun to understand her own position within this intricate system. As the mother of Jedediah, the child Nathan had proclaimed beloved of God, she possessed a unique status that was both powerful and precarious. The prophecies surrounding her son's birth had marked him as special, but it had also made him a focus of attention that could prove dangerous in a world where princes were often seen as threats to be managed. "He grows more beautiful each day," observed Michal, David's first wife, settling beside them on the cushioned bench. Her tone was warm but careful, as it always was when discussing the younger wives' children. "The Lord has been kind," Bathsheba replied diplomatically. She had learned the language of palace conversation, where every compliment was balanced, every statement measured for its broader implications. Michal reached out to touch Jedediah's tiny hand, and the baby grasped her finger with surprising strength. "He has his father's grip," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. David was the same way as a child, according to his mother, always reaching for something just beyond his grasp. The comment carried deeper meaning than its surface suggested. In the complex dynamics of royal succession, every prince was potentially reaching for his father's throne. Jedediah was still an infant, but his special status meant that his future would be watched and analyzed from the very beginning. "He's too young for such thoughts," Bathsheba said gently. "For now, he's simply a child who needs his mother's care." But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Jedediah might be months old, but he was already a player in games he couldn't understand. His very existence had implications for inheritance laws, marriage alliances, and the delicate balance of power that kept the kingdom stable. Other women had begun to gather in the courtyard, rough drawn by the magnetic pull of royal gossip and the eternal fascination with babies. They cooed over Jedediah, offered advice about child rearing, shared stories of their own children's development. The conversation was pleasant and ordinary, but Bathsheba noticed how they studied her son, measuring his progress against that of other royal children, looking for signs of the specialness that Nathan's prophecy had proclaimed. "Has the king spoken of his plans for the boy's education?" asked Abigail, David's third wife, her question casual but pointed. "It's early yet," Bathsheba replied. "But David wants him to learn both the arts of war and the ways of peace. A future leader needs understanding of many things." The phrase future leader hung in the air, acknowledging what everyone knew but rarely spoke directly. All of David's sons were potentially future leaders, but some were more potential than others. Jedediah's divine blessing gave him advantages that birth order and political maneuvering might not be able to overcome. As if summoned by their conversation, David himself appeared in the courtyard, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. The women rose respectfully, but he gestured for them to remain seated, his attention focused on his wife and child. "How is our young prince today?" he asked, reaching down to lift Jediah from Bathsheba's arms. The baby had grown accustomed to his father's visits and smiled at the familiar face, reaching up to grab at David's beard. "Growing stronger each day," Bathsheba answered, watching the interplay between father and son with mixed emotions. David's affection for the child appeared genuine, but she knew that royal affection was always complicated by considerations of dynasty and succession. "Good," David said, bouncing the baby gently. "Strong sons make strong kingdoms. Israel needs leaders who can face whatever challenges the future brings." The other women exchanged glances at this comment. David had many sons, and each had been described at various times as the future strength of Israel. But there was something in his tone when he spoke of Jedediah that suggested deeper hopes, higher expectations. A servant approached with news that required the king's immediate attention, and he reluctantly returned the baby to Bathsheba's arms. "I must attend to matters of state," he said, "but I want to see him again before the evening meal." After David's departure, the courtyard buzzed with quiet analysis. The women had all witnessed the king's particular attention to this child, noted the way he held him, listened to the tone of his voice. In a world where royal favor could determine everything from daily comfort to ultimate survival, such observations were more than mere gossip. "The king shows special fondness for the boy," Michael observed carefully. "As he should," Bathsheba replied with equal care. A father's love is a precious gift for any child. But privately, she wondered if David's attention stemmed from genuine paternal affection or from the weight of prophecy and guilt that surrounded Jedediah's conception. The child was living proof of choices that had cost other lives, but he was also evidence of divine mercy that could transform human failing into blessing. As the afternoon wore on and the courtyard gradually emptied, Bathsheba found herself alone with her thoughts and her son. Jedediah had fallen asleep in her arms, his small face peaceful and innocent, unaware of the complex currents swirling around his young life. She thought about Uriah, who would never see this child, never know the son who might have been his. She thought about David, caught between love and calculation, genuine affection and royal necessity. She thought about herself, navigating a world where every choice carried consequences she was still learning to understand. But mostly she thought about Jedediah himself, this small person who had arrived carrying such weight of expectation and hope. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges awaited him as he grew into his prophetic destiny, he would always be her child first. Beloved not just of God, but of the mother who had brought him into the world through pain and love and the mysterious workings of divine mercy. The sun was setting over Jerusalem, painting the palace walls in shades of gold and rose. Soon the evening meal would begin, bringing its own complexities of protocol and politics. But for now, in the quiet courtyard with her sleeping child, Bathsheba allowed herself to simply be a mother holding her son, finding peace in that most ancient and simple of human bonds. The illness. The sickness came without warning on a morning when Jerusalem basked under clear skies and gentle breezes. Jedidiah had been feeding normally, playing with the bright pieces of cloth that delighted him, gurgling responses to his mother's soft songs. Then, between one moment and the next, everything changed. Bathsheba noticed it first in the way he refused his morning milk, turning his head away from what had always brought him comfort. His skin felt warm to her touch, warmer than the natural heat of a healthy child. When she lifted him to her shoulder, his usual squirming energy was replaced by an alarming limpness. "Fetch the physicians," she commanded the servant who brought her morning bread. Immediately. Word spread through the palace with the swift efficiency that attended any crisis involving the royal family. Within the hour, Jerusalem's finest healers had gathered in Bathsheba's chamber, their faces grave as they examined the increasingly listless child. "The fever is high," the chief physician reported after his careful examination. "We will try cooling baths, herbal remedies, prayers to speed his recovery." But his eyes spoke what his words did not dare. Some illnesses defied all earthly intervention. David arrived as the physicians were preparing their treatments. One look at his son's flushed face and labored breathing told him everything he needed to know. This was not ordinary infant sickness that would pass with time and care. This was something deeper, more dangerous. "What can be done?" he asked the assembled healers, his royal authority demanding answers they could not give. "We will try everything within our power, my lord," the chief physician replied carefully. "But ultimately, the child's fate rests in hands higher than ours." The diplomatic phrasing could not hide the reality they all faced. Jedidiah was seriously ill, perhaps mortally so. Medicine had reached its limits. Now came the time for prayer, for hope, for the mysterious workings of divine will that no human wisdom could predict or control. David dismissed the physicians but remained in the chamber, studying his son's small face with desperate intensity. The baby's breathing was shallow and rapid, his usual bright alertness replaced by the dull withdrawal that marked serious illness. "I should send for Nathan," Bathsheba said quietly. If this is what the Lord wills, we should know." But David shook his head firmly. "Not yet. First we fight, first we pray, first we exhaust every possibility before we accept defeat." What followed were the longest days of Bathsheba's life. She rarely left Jedidiah's side, holding him when he seemed to find comfort in her arms, laying him gently in his cradle when rest appeared to ease his breathing. The palace physicians came and went with their potions and procedures, but the child's condition remained unchanged, not worsening dramatically, but showing no signs of improvement. David's response surprised everyone, including Bathsheba. The king, who commanded armies and governed kingdoms, stripped himself of royal dignity and threw himself into desperate supplication. He fasted completely, refusing all food and drink. He cast aside his royal robes and lay on the floor of his chamber, covered only in rough sackcloth, praying with an intensity that bordered on madness. His servants and advisors watched in bewilderment as their powerful monarch reduced himself to the most basic posture of human pleading. Officials who needed royal decisions were turned away. State business ground to a halt. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath while its king wrestled with God over the life of one small child. "My lord, you must eat something," his personal servant urged on the third day of fasting. "Your strength fails. The kingdom needs you." "The kingdom can wait," David replied from his position on the floor, his voice hoarse from constant prayer. "My son cannot." Bathsheba divided her time between caring for Jedidiah and watching her husband's spiritual agony. She had never seen David like this, stripped of pretense, reduced to pure human need, bargaining with the Almighty like any desperate parent facing the loss of a child. On the fourth night, as Jedidiah's breathing grew more labored and his fever spiked higher, Nathan finally came. The prophet entered the chamber without announcement, his presence filling the room with an authority that needed no introduction. He examined the child briefly, then looked at David, still prostrated on the floor, then at Bathsheba, keeping her vigil beside the cradle. "The Lord's will cannot be changed by fasting or bargaining," he said gently. What is decided in heaven will come to pass on earth. David raised his head, his face gaunt from days without food, his eyes burning with desperate hope. But surely the Lord can be moved by a father's plea. Surely mercy can triumph over judgment. Nathan's expression held infinite compassion but no comfort. Some things are beyond changing, even by prayer. Some consequences cannot be undone, even by repentance. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of understanding through the chamber. This illness was not random misfortune or natural catastrophe. It was connected to choices made months ago, to sins committed and prices that still demanded payment. Bathsheba felt the truth settle in her heart like winter cold. Jedediah's sickness was not just illness, it was consequence, the delayed but inevitable result of the adultery and murder that had brought him into existence. The child beloved of God would not be spared the earthly effects of his parents' choices. How long? She asked simply. Nathan's eyes grew soft with sorrow. Not long now, tonight perhaps, or tomorrow. The Lord is merciful. The child will not suffer much longer. With that, he departed, leaving them alone with their dying son and the terrible knowledge that no amount of prayer or fasting could alter what was already written in the divine ledger of justice and mercy. David rose from the floor for the first time in days, moved to his son's cradle, and lifted the barely breathing child into his arms. For a moment, the three of them formed a picture of family unity, parents sheltering their child against the darkness that pressed close around them. But even love could not stop what had already begun. Even the desperate prayers of kings could not rewrite the consequences of choices already made. The longest night was beginning. The death of the child. Dawn came gray and quiet over Jerusalem, but in the palace chamber where Jedediah lay, day and night had lost their meaning. Time moved differently in the space between hope and despair, measured not by sun and shadow, but by the rhythm of shallow breaths that grew steadily weaker. Bathsheba had not slept. She sat beside the cradle, one hand resting gently on her son's chest, feeling the faint rise and fall that proved life still flickered within the small body. Each breath was a small victory, each pause between breaths a moment of terror. David remained on the floor, but his frantic praying had given way to something deeper and quieter. He lay in complete stillness, his lips moving silently, his entire being focused on communion with the God who held his son's life in invisible hands. The servants moved through the chamber like shadows, bringing fresh water that went unused, food that no one touched, clean linens that were unnecessary. They understood they were witnessing something sacred and terrible. The death of a prince, the breaking of a king, the mysterious workings of divine justice that human minds could not fully grasp. As morning light filtered through the window, Jedediah's breathing became more labored. The fever that had burned through his small body for days was consuming what little strength remained. His eyes, when they opened at all, showed no recognition, no awareness of the loving faces that watched over him. Bathsheba lifted him from the cradle and held him against her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of his heartbeat like a bird trying to escape. She sang to him softly, the lullabies she had learned from her own mother, the gentle songs that mothers had sung to dying children since the world began. "Sleep, my little one," she whispered against his fevered forehead. "Rest now. Let go of your pain." David rose from the floor and came to sit beside them, his hand covering both mother and child. For a moment, they were simply parents saying goodbye to their son, their love creating a circle of tenderness around the approaching darkness. "He's beautiful," David said quietly, his voice thick with grief. "Even now, even like this, beautiful and beloved." Jedediah's breathing grew more irregular, longer pauses between each shallow breath. His small hands, which had so recently learned to grasp and hold, lay still against his mother's arm. The fever was finally releasing its hold, but taking life with it as it departed. Bathsheba felt the exact moment when it happened. One breath, then silence. The tiny chest beneath her hand grew still. The flutter of heartbeat faded into nothing. The spark that had animated this small body for such a brief time simply stopped. "He's gone," she whispered, though they all knew it already. David's shoulders shook with silent sobs. All his royal power, all his military victories, all his wealth and wisdom had proved useless against this final enemy. Death had claimed his son, despite every prayer, every plea, every desperate bargain offered to heaven. But then something unexpected happened. David wiped his eyes, stood slowly, and looked at his dead son with an expression that held sorrow but no longer held desperation. "He cannot come back to me," he said softly, "but I will go to him someday." The simple statement carried profound acceptance, a father's faith that death was not the end of the story, but merely a chapter break. Somewhere beyond the veil of mortality, Jedediah waited, beloved of God, free from pain, perfect in whatever realm received the souls of innocent children. Bathsheba continued to hold their son's still body, memorizing the weight of him, the shape of his small hands, the curve of his ear against her cheek. These would be her last moments of physical closeness with the child she had carried, birthed, and loved with fierce protectiveness. "We need to prepare him," she said eventually, her voice steady despite the tears that fell silently down her cheeks. The ritual care of the dead was both heartbreaking and comforting. They washed Jedediah's small body with gentle hands, dressed him in the finest cloth the palace could provide, wrapped him in spices and herbs that would preserve him for burial. Each touch was an act of love, a final service to the child who had brought such joy and sorrow into their lives. Word of the prince's death spread through Jerusalem with the swift inevitability of all tragic news. The city that had celebrated his birth now mourned his passing, understanding somehow that this death carried significance beyond ordinary grief. The child blessed by God, named by a prophet, marked for special destiny, had lived only long enough to touch the world with mystery before departing it. The burial took place at sunset as shadows lengthened across the city of David. A small procession carried the tiny coffin to the royal tomb, where Jedediah would rest among kings and princes whose lives had been measured in decades rather than months. Nathan spoke the words of committal, his voice carrying across the gathering dusk. "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This child, beloved of God, returns now to the one who sent him. His brief life was not wasted, but was part of a story too large for us to understand." As earth covered the small coffin, Bathsheba felt something shift within her chest. The acute pain of loss would remain, would soften with time, but never completely disappear. But alongside the grief was something else, a strange peace, an understanding that Jedediah's story had been complete even in its brevity. David stood beside her, his hands steady on her shoulder, his own grief transformed into acceptance that bordered on relief. The child had suffered, but his suffering was over. The consequences of their choices had been paid, but paid in a way that somehow felt more like mercy than punishment. Walking back from the tomb, as stars appeared overhead, Bathsheba realized that Jedediah's death had changed something fundamental between her and David. They had shared the deepest possible loss, had watched helplessly as death claimed what they loved most. The experience had burned away pretense and calculation, leaving only the raw truth of human vulnerability and the strange comfort of shared sorrow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about the future. But tonight they were simply two people who had loved a child and lost him, who had discovered that some kinds of pain could only be borne together, and that even in the deepest darkness love endured. Jedediah was gone, but he had left behind something precious, the knowledge that even the briefest lives could carry infinite meaning, and that love was stronger than death because it continued long after breath had stopped. A new beginning. After the darkness, light comes softly, like dawn breaking over the mountains of Judah. Hope finds its way back into the royal chambers. Bathsheba carries another child. This time the palace whispers speak of blessing rather than curse. David walks differently now. The weight of his earlier sins has carved new lines around his eyes, but also deeper wisdom in his heart. He tends to Bathsheba with gentle care, as if protecting something precious that might slip away. His hands, once rough from the shepherd's staff and warrior's sword, now touch her with the reverence of one who has learned the true cost of carelessness. The pregnancy unfolds like a prayer answered slowly. Each day brings new strength to Bathsheba's frame. She moves through the palace corridors with quiet grace, her hand resting on the growing life within. The servants watch her with respect, born of suffering witnessed and dignity maintained. She has walked through fire and emerged not unburned, but somehow refined. When the labor pains begin, they come with the gentle insistence of rain after drought. David paces the halls while the midwives attend his wife. This time he does not bargain with heaven or make desperate vows. He simply waits, knowing that some gifts come only in their proper season. The child arrives with the first light of morning, a son, healthy and strong, his cries filling the chamber with the music of new life. Bathsheba holds him close, her tears mixing joy with memory. This baby will never replace the one she lost, but he carries his own promise, his own purpose in the unfolding story of Israel. David enters the room with steps as soft as his shepherds approach to sleeping sheep. He looks upon his son with wonder, seeing not just an heir, but a second chance. The baby's fingers wrap around his father's thumb with surprising strength, as if already claiming his place in the kingdom. The palace celebrates with restrained joy. There is feasting, but it carries the weight of hard-won wisdom. The musicians play, but their melodies speak of redemption rather than simple triumph. David composes new psalms in these days, like songs that acknowledge both the mercy and justice of the Almighty. Bathsheba recovers with the steady patience she has learned through trial. She nurses her son in the quiet hours before dawn, when the palace sleeps and Jerusalem lies peaceful under stars. These moments belong to her alone, a mother's sacred time with the life she has brought forth from her own body. The child grows with unusual vigor. His eyes, bright and alert, seem to take in everything around him. When he smiles, which happens often, both parents see glimpses of a future that might be brighter than their past. David speaks to him in the ancient tongue, teaching him the names of God even before the boy can speak. Bathsheba watches her husband with their son and sees a man transformed. The king who once took what he desired now gives freely of himself. He tells the baby stories of Abraham and Isaac, of Moses and the burning bush, of a shepherd boy who faced a giant with only stones and faith. The palace women marvel at how Bathsheba has changed as well. No longer the quiet beauty glimpsed from rooftops, she has become a woman of substance and depth. Her voice, when she speaks in council, carries the authority of one who has faced both shame and sorrow without breaking. As the seasons turn, the child thrives. His laughter echoes through halls that once knew only whispered secrets and political scheming. David delights in teaching him to walk, supporting those first wobbling steps across the throne room's polished stones. Each milestone brings fresh joy, a reminder that life continues its forward motion despite past sorrows. The boy's presence changes the very atmosphere of the court. Courtiers who once spoke only of war and taxation now pause to watch him play. Even the stern-faced guards soften when he toddles past, his small hands reaching for the bronze fixtures and colorful tapestries that adorn the royal quarters. Bathsheba finds herself changed by motherhood in ways she had not expected. This second chance at raising a child awakens depths of love she thought lost with her first son's death. She discovers strength she did not know she possessed, a fierce protectiveness that would move mountains to keep this precious life safe. David names the boy Solomon, meaning peace. It is a name born of hope rather than circumstance, a declaration of faith in a future beyond the conflicts that have marked his reign. When he holds his son, the king's face shows the same wonder he once felt as a youth watching his father's flocks under endless skies. The child's arrival marks more than personal healing for David and Bathsheba. It signals a new chapter for Israel itself, though none yet know what greatness lies hidden in this infant's future. For now, it is enough that love has found a way to bloom again in soil once bitter with regret. Jedediah. The prophet Nathan comes again to the palace, but this time his steps carry blessing rather than judgment. His weathered face shows the gentle smile of one who brings good news from the throne of heaven. The guards usher him into the royal presence with respect born of his previous prophecy's terrible accuracy. David receives Nathan in the same chamber where harsh truths were once spoken. But now, a baby's cradle sits nearby, and sunlight streams through windows that once seemed shrouded in divine displeasure. The king stands as the prophet approaches, showing the deference due to God's messenger. Nathan's eyes fall upon the child with a look of recognition that transcends the natural. He sees something in the infant that others cannot yet perceive, a destiny written in features still soft with babyhood. The prophet's hands, skilled in blessing and anointing, reach toward the cradle with reverent care. "The Lord has spoken concerning this child," Nathan declares, his voice carrying the authority of heaven itself. David and Bathsheba draw closer, their hearts quickening with anticipation. After so much sorrow, they dare to hope for words of favor. The prophet lifts the baby with the gentle confidence of one who has held many children in blessing. Solomon looks up at him with bright, unblinking eyes, as if recognizing something familiar in the prophet's weathered features. A moment of perfect stillness settles over the chamber. "His name shall be Jedediah," Nathan pronounces, his voice soft but certain. "Beloved of the Lord, the Almighty has set his love upon this child in a special way. What was taken in judgment shall be restored in mercy." Bathsheba's breath catches in her throat. The name carries promise beyond her deepest hopes, a divine endorsement that wipes away the shame of Solomon's conception. This child, born from their union marked by sin, now bears the stamp of heaven's particular favor. David's eyes fill with tears he does not try to hide. The man who once wept on the ground pleading for his first son's life now witnesses God's unexpected grace. Sometimes mercy comes wrapped in packages we never thought to request, at times when we have learned to expect only justice. Nathan continues his prophecy with words that seem to glow with their own light. "This child shall build what his father could not. Where David's hands were stained with war, Solomon's shall craft peace. The temple that the king has dreamed shall rise through his son's wisdom." The implications ripple through the room like stones dropped in still water. The great project of David's heart, the permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant, will pass to this infant now sleeping in the prophet's arms. What seemed like divine rejection becomes divine preparation. Bathsheba listens with the intensity of a woman who has learned that God's ways often confound human understanding. Her first child was taken despite all prayers and fasting. Now her second son receives blessing beyond imagination. The mystery of divine providence humbles even as it amazes. The prophet speaks of wisdom that will surpass all understanding, of a reign marked by prosperity and justice. Nations will come seeking Solomon's counsel, drawn by a wisdom that flows from heaven itself. The child who now grasps at Nathan's beard will one day judge between kings and settle disputes that baffle other rulers. David accepts the prophecy with the mixture of joy and trepidation that comes with great responsibility. To be chosen as the father of such a child both honors and humbles him. The shepherd boy who slew a giant now stands amazed at the greater victory his son will win through wisdom rather than warfare. As Nathan prepares to leave, he places the baby back in his mother's arms with ceremonial care. "Guard him well," he tells Bathsheba, though his tone suggests he knows she needs no such instruction. "Great things await, but they must grow in their proper season." The prophet's departure leaves the royal family in contemplative silence. They have witnessed something beyond ordinary blessing, a moment when eternity touches time. The child sleeps peacefully, unaware of the destiny that has just been pronounced over his small form. In the days that follow, David and Bathsheba find themselves studying their son with new eyes. Every gesture, every sound he makes seems freighted with significance. They see hints of the future wisdom in his alert attention to everything around him, in the way he seems to listen when they speak. The court buzzes with news of the prophet's visit and blessing. Some remember Nathan's earlier prophecy and marvel at how judgment has transformed into favor. Others begin to position themselves carefully, recognizing that this infant may one day hold their futures in his small hands. Bathsheba treasures Nathan's words in her heart, alongside Mary's future pondering of angelic announcements. She has learned that God's plans often work through suffering toward joy, through loss toward restoration. Her son carries both human frailty and divine favor, a combination that requires both trust and vigilance. The royal court years pass like gentle seasons in the life of the palace. Solomon grows from infant to child under the watchful eyes of parents who have learned to treasure each ordinary day. Bathsheba finds her place in the royal court not as mere decoration, but as a woman whose wisdom has been refined by trial. The morning councils take on new patterns as David increasingly seeks his wife's counsel. She sits quietly in the corner, observing the flow of discussion between military commanders and court officials. Her contributions come sparingly but carry weight, spoken with the authority of one who has seen both the heights and depths of royal life. The other women of the court regard Bathsheba with complex emotions. Some envy her position as David's beloved wife, while others respect the dignity with which she has navigated scandal and sorrow. None can deny that she has earned her place through suffering as much as beauty. Solomon plays at her feet during these sessions, building towers with carved blocks or drawing pictures on papyrus with reed styluses. Even as a child, he shows unusual attention to the grown-up conversations around him. His bright eyes follow speakers with an intensity that suggests understanding beyond his years. David delights in teaching his son the arts of kingship through gentle lessons disguised as play. They walk through the palace gardens while the king explains how different flowers need different care, just as different people require different approaches from their ruler. The boy listens with the absorbed attention of one born to leadership. Bathsheba watches these father-son moments with quiet satisfaction. She sees David's genuine love for Solomon, free from the political calculations that mark many royal relationships. This child will not inherit the throne through scheming or elimination of rivals, but through the natural affection of a father who has learned the true value of family. The palace functions with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Servants who once whispered about scandals now speak respectfully of the royal family's restored unity. The very atmosphere has changed from one of tension and secrecy to something approaching peace. Foreign ambassadors visiting the court notice the difference. Where once they encountered a king haunted by his mistakes, they now meet a ruler who has found balance between strength and mercy. David's justice has grown more nuanced, tempered by personal experience of both sin and forgiveness. Bathsheba develops her own network of relationships within the palace. The serving women trust her with their concerns, knowing she will listen without judgment. The scribes seek her opinion on matters of law concerning women and children, recognizing her unique perspective on royal justice. Solomon's education begins early, not through formal tutoring, but through constant exposure to the workings of government. He learns to read by studying official documents alongside his father. His writing lessons come from copying psalms and royal decrees. Mathematics enters through discussions of tax collection and military supplies. The boy shows particular fascination with the religious ceremonies that mark Israel's calendar. He watches intently as priests offer sacrifices, asking thoughtful questions about the meaning behind the rituals. David explains the stories of their people's covenant with God, seeing his son's unusual receptiveness to spiritual matters. Bathsheba teaches Solomon different lessons, drawn from her own experience of navigating court life. She shows him how to observe people carefully, to notice the difference between what they say and what they truly mean. These skills will serve a future king well in dealing with courtiers and foreign dignitaries. Music fills their family time together. David plays his harp while Bathsheba sings lullabies learned from her own childhood. Solomon learns to keep rhythm with small instruments, his natural ear for harmony evident even in these early years. The psalms that will one day bear his name have their roots in these quiet family concerts. The seasonal festivals bring special joy to their household. Solomon participates in the Passover celebration with the solemn attention of a child who senses the importance of what he witnesses. The Feast of Tabernacles becomes a time of outdoor adventure, sleeping in temporary shelters that remind Israel of their wilderness wandering. As Solomon reaches his 7th year, formal education begins. The finest tutors in Jerusalem compete for the honor of teaching the prince. David chooses carefully, seeking not just scholars, but men of character who will shape his son's heart as well as his mind. Bathsheba insists on having input into the selection process. She interviews each potential teacher, asking probing questions about their methods and philosophy. Her standards surprise some with their rigor, but David supports her involvement completely. The chosen tutors find themselves teaching not just a prince, but a child whose questions often pierce to the heart of complex issues. Solomon's curiosity seems boundless, ranging from the mechanics of building construction to the psychology of human motivation. His teachers struggle to keep pace with his rapid understanding. Court life continues its ancient rhythms around this growing family. Petitioners still come seeking justice, merchants still negotiate trade agreements, and military leaders still plan defensive strategies. But the presence of a beloved child changes everything subtly, reminding all that kingdoms exist ultimately to protect and nurture the next generation. The succession question time moves like water flowing downhill, carrying David toward the winter of his reign. The king's hair shows silver now, and his step lacks the spring of earlier years. Those who watch thrones closely begin to whisper of succession, though David remains sharp in mind and strong in authority. The palace corridors carry new currents of conversation. Courtiers gather in small groups, speaking in voices just low enough to avoid the appearance of conspiracy. The question hangs unspoken but present in every political calculation. When David passes, who will sit on Israel's throne? Bathsheba observes these changes with the careful attention of a woman who has learned to read the subtle signs of shifting power. She notices which courtiers pay increased attention to David's elder sons, which merchants begin cultivating relationships with potential heirs. The game of succession plays out in glances and small gestures as much as in open declarations. Solomon, now a young man of unusual wisdom and insight, remains seemingly unaware of the political currents swirling around him. He continues his studies with passionate intensity, delving into law, philosophy, and the complex art of governance. His teachers marvel at his ability to grasp not just facts, but the underlying principles that connect seemingly unrelated ideas. David watches his son's development with satisfaction mixed with concern. He recognizes Solomon's exceptional gifts, but worries about the burden such abilities will place on relatively young shoulders. The king has learned that wisdom brings both power and responsibility in equal measure. The other royal sons pursue their own interests with varying degrees of ambition. Adonijah, David's fourth son, shows the natural confidence of one born to privilege. His mother Haggith encourages his princely aspirations, though she stops short of open political maneuvering. Still, observant courtiers note the increasing attention he pays to military matters and public appearances. Absalom's rebellion years earlier cast a shadow over discussions of succession. No one speaks openly of the civil war that nearly tore Israel apart, but memories remain fresh enough to make everyone cautious about divided loyalties. The kingdom needs a smooth transition, not another struggle between brothers. Bathsheba finds herself the object of increased attention from various court factions. Some seek to gauge her influence over David's decision-making, while others probe for hints about her own preferences. She responds to these overtures with diplomatic neutrality, neither encouraging false hopes nor revealing her private thoughts. The queen has learned to navigate these waters with skill developed through years of observation and experience. She listens more than she speaks, allowing others to reveal their intentions while keeping her own counsel. This restraint often frustrates those seeking to predict her actions, but it serves her family's interests well. Religious leaders also begin positioning themselves regarding succession. The priests recognize that the next king will make crucial decisions about temple worship and religious policy. Some favor continuity with David's established practices, while others hope for reforms or innovations in Israel's spiritual life. Nathan the prophet maintains his role as spiritual advisor to the royal family, but he speaks carefully about future matters. His previous prophecies about Solomon's destiny remain known to only a few, and he shows no inclination to engage in political speculation about timing or circumstances. Trade relationships with neighboring kingdoms add another layer of complexity to succession planning. Foreign rulers have invested significant diplomatic effort in establishing good relations with David's court. They watch carefully for signs of how the transition might affect existing treaties and commercial agreements. Solomon continues his education in practical governance by observing his father's daily decisions. He sits quietly during morning councils, watching how David balances competing interests and personalities. The young prince asks thoughtful questions afterward, seeking to understand not just what decisions were made, but why. Military commanders find themselves in delicate positions regarding succession. Their oath of loyalty binds them to David personally, but they also consider their responsibilities to Israel's security. Some begin subtle inquiries about the military experience and capabilities of various potential heirs. Bathsheba strengthens her own position through careful relationship building. She cultivates friendships with influential women throughout the court, creating a network of support that extends beyond her immediate family. These relationships, built on mutual respect rather than political calculation, will prove valuable in future challenges. The palace servants, often overlooked in discussions of power, possess their own insights into the succession question. They observe daily interactions between family members, noting relationships and tensions invisible to casual observers. Their loyalty to the royal household makes them valuable sources of information for those who know how to listen. David himself shows no inclination to make formal succession announcements. He remains vigorous in his duties as king, leading council meetings and making judicial decisions with undiminished authority. Yet those closest to him sense his awareness that such decisions cannot be postponed indefinitely. The seasonal rhythm of court life continues unchanged on the surface, but underneath runs a current of anticipation that touches every aspect of palace function. Feasts and ceremonies take on added significance as potential venues for important announcements. Even routine administrative decisions are scrutinized for hints about future policy directions. Adonijah rises, morning light streams through the palace windows, but shadows of ambition move through the corridors with increasing boldness. Adonijah, now grown to manhood with the bearing of a natural leader, begins to gather supporters around him, like a lodestone attracts iron filings. His mother Haggith watches her son's rising influence with fierce maternal pride. She has waited years for this moment, and at nurturing Adonijah's royal aspirations, while maintaining the appearance of proper deference to David's authority. Now she sees opportunity in the king's advancing age and Solomon's continued focus on scholarly pursuits rather than political maneuvering. The young prince surrounds himself with capable men drawn from various levels of society. Joab, David's longtime military commander, finds Adonijah's combination of charm and ambition appealing. The old soldier has served David faithfully for decades, but he recognizes that loyalty to the crown may require supporting the most capable successor. Abiathar the priest also aligns himself with Adonijah's cause. This high religious official brings both spiritual authority and practical political connections to the growing coalition. His support lends respectability to what might otherwise appear as mere ambition, framing Adonijah's claim in terms of divine favor and traditional succession patterns. The prince moves carefully at first, testing the waters of court opinion without openly challenging his father's authority. He increases his public visibility, appearing at ceremonial functions with appropriate dignity, and making himself available to hear petitioners' concerns. These actions build his reputation as an accessible and competent leader. Adonijah's natural charisma serves him well in these endeavors. He possesses the ability to make individuals feel heard and valued, a crucial skill for any leader seeking broad support. Veterans of David's military campaigns find themselves drawn to this prince who combines respect for tradition with promises of continued strong leadership. Bathsheba observes these developments with growing concern, though she maintains her customary composure in public settings. She recognizes the skillful nature of Adonijah's campaign and understands that his success could have profound implications for Solomon's future. Yet she refrains from open opposition, knowing that premature action might strengthen her stepson's position. The coalition around Adonijah grows steadily as influential figures calculate their positions regarding succession. Merchants who have profited from stable trade policies see continuity in supporting an experienced prince over a scholarly younger brother. Regional governors weigh their relationships with various court factions. Solomon continues his studies and administrative apprenticeship, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned by his half-brother's political activities. He maintains his focus on understanding the deeper principles of governance rather than engaging in the tactical maneuvering that increasingly occupies court attention. This detachment sometimes frustrates his supporters, who wish he would show more active interest in securing his future. David observes these developments with the complex emotions of a father watching his children compete for his legacy. He values Adonijah's leadership qualities while remaining committed to the divine promise regarding Solomon's destiny. The king's silence on succession matters reflects not indecision, but careful timing. The growing polarization within the court creates subtle tensions that affect daily palace life. Servants find themselves inadvertently choosing sides through their associations and service assignments. Even routine matters like seating arrangements at formal dinners take on political significance. Foreign ambassadors watch these internal developments with professional interest. The stability of their own nation's relationships with Israel depends partly on predicting and adapting to changes in Jerusalem's leadership. Some begin quiet diplomatic contacts with various court factions. Adonijah's supporters begin making practical preparations for a potential transition. They quietly assess military resources, treasury contents, and administrative capabilities. These activities remain discreet but demonstrate serious commitment to their candidate's success. The prince himself grows bolder as his support base expands. He begins hosting gatherings that resemble informal court sessions, hearing disputes and offering counsel on various matters. These events serve both to demonstrate his governing abilities and to build loyalty among participants. Religious ceremonies provide opportunities for Adonijah to display his devotion and leadership qualities. He participates prominently in temple rituals, consulting with priests about proper procedures and making generous offerings. These actions reinforce his image as a pious and legitimate heir. Nathan the prophet maintains his careful neutrality in public while observing events with deep concern. He remembers clearly his prophecy about Solomon's special calling and destiny, but he also recognizes the delicate nature of divine timing. Premature revelation might provoke the very crisis it seeks to prevent. Bathsheba finds herself increasingly isolated within the palace's shifting political landscape. Many courtiers now treat her with cautious respect rather than genuine warmth, uncertain about her future influence should Adonijah succeed to the throne. She responds by deepening her relationships with those who remain genuinely supportive. The situation reaches a critical point as rumors begin circulating about Adonijah's intentions to make formal succession claims. Some whisper of elaborate ceremonies being planned, while others speak of military preparations that go beyond normal security measures. The time for subtle maneuvering appears to be ending. Bathsheba intervenes. The morning arrives heavy with unspoken urgency. Bathsheba wakes to news that crystallizes her fears into immediate necessity. Adonijah has proclaimed himself king at On Rogel, gathering supporters for a coronation feast that deliberately excludes both Solomon and those loyal to his cause. She rises with the composed determination of a woman who has faced crisis before. Years of palace life have taught her that decisive moments often come without warning, requiring swift action based on careful preparation. The time for patient observation has passed. Nathan arrives at her chambers with footsteps that echo the gravity of their shared concern. The prophet's weathered face shows the strain of watching divine promises threatened by human ambition. Together, they represent both earthly wisdom and heavenly authority, a combination that could still alter the course of events. The king must be reminded of his oath, Nathan says simply, his words carrying the weight of prophecy and practical necessity. Bathsheba nods, understanding that this moment will test everything she has learned about courage, timing, and the delicate art of approaching absolute power. They plan their strategy with the careful precision of those who understand that failure could mean not just personal disaster, but the thwarting of God's declared purposes. Nathan will follow Bathsheba's initial audience with David, reinforcing her words with prophetic authority and providing divine context for the unfolding crisis. Bathsheba prepares herself with ritual care, choosing garments that reflect both dignity and supplication. She understands that her appearance before David must strike the proper balance between wife and subject, between personal appeal and royal protocol. Every detail matters in such crucial moments. The walk to David's private chambers feels both endless and too brief. Palace servants step aside respectfully, sensing the importance of her mission without understanding its full significance. She carries with her the hopes of those who believe in Solomon's destiny and the fears of those who see that future threatened. David receives her in his inner sanctuary, the place where kings retreat from the public demands of rulership. He looks older than his years, bearing the accumulated weight of decades on Israel's throne. Yet his eyes still hold the alertness that has served him well through countless challenges. Bathsheba approaches with the graceful deference she has perfected through years of marriage to absolute authority. She bows appropriately, then rises to meet his questioning gaze with steady composure. The next few moments will determine whether divine promise aligns with human action. "My lord the king," she begins, her voice carrying just the right mixture of respect and urgency. "You swore to your servant by the Lord your God, saying, 'Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne.' But now Adonijah has become king, and you, my lord the king, do not know it." The words hang in the chamber's stillness like morning mist before sunrise. David's expression shifts as he processes both the information and its implications. Bathsheba watches his face carefully, seeing the moment when understanding crystallizes into recognition of necessary action. She continues her report with careful precision, detailing Adonijah's supporters and their actions without emotional embellishment. The facts speak for themselves, painting a picture of conspiracy that threatens not just Solomon's inheritance, but the stability of the kingdom itself. David listens with the focused attention he once gave to battlefield reports. His questions probe specific details, seeking to understand the full scope of Adonijah's movement and its potential consequences. The king's strategic mind engages fully with this new challenge to his authority. Nathan's arrival provides perfect timing for reinforcing Bathsheba's message. The prophet enters with the measured dignity that marks his divine calling, bringing both confirmation of the crisis and reminder of previous prophecies about Solomon's special destiny. The prophet's words carry additional weight, connecting current events to larger patterns of divine purpose. He reminds David of God's promise regarding Solomon while making clear the urgent need for royal action to prevent the thwarting of heavenly plans. David's response shows the decisiveness that has marked his reign at crucial moments. The king who once faced Goliath with shepherd's courage now confronts a more complex challenge with mature wisdom. His oath to Bathsheba will be fulfilled, but the execution requires immediate and careful planning. The private council that follows involves trusted advisors summoned hastily but chosen with care. Zadok the priest, Benaiah, the commander of the royal guard, and other proven loyalists receive orders that will reshape Israel's immediate future. Solomon's coronation must happen swiftly and with unmistakable authority. Bathsheba participates in these planning sessions as both queen and mother, offering insights drawn from her unique position within the palace. Her knowledge of various courtiers' loyalties proves valuable in determining whom to trust with crucial responsibilities. The transformation of crisis into opportunity demonstrates the power of decisive action guided by clear purpose. What began as Adonijah's challenge to divine promise becomes the catalyst for Solomon's elevation to the throne his destiny demands. Solomon crowned. The ancient ritual unfolds with swift precision as Jerusalem awakens to the sound of trumpets echoing from Gihon Spring. David's orders move through the palace like water flowing downhill, carrying trusted servants toward their appointed roles in history's unfolding drama. Zadok the priest emerges from the sacred precincts, carrying the horn of oil reserved for anointing kings. This same vessel once poured blessing upon David's head when Samuel called him from his father's flocks. Now it will consecrate the son as it once blessed the father, connecting past promise to present fulfillment. Benaiah commands the king's personal guard with military efficiency, born of decades serving David's throne. These warriors, chosen for loyalty as much as skill, form Solomon's court to the coronation site. Their presence declares unmistakably that this ceremony carries royal authority, not mere priestly blessing. Nathan the prophet joins the procession with the solemnity befitting one who has seen divine purposes working through human events. His participation transforms what might appear as political maneuvering into prophetic fulfillment. The word spoken over infant Solomon now finds expression in adult coronation. Solomon himself moves through these events with calm acceptance that surprises even his supporters. The young man who has spent years studying the principles of governance now faces their practical application. His composure suggests preparation that goes beyond academic learning to spiritual readiness. Bathsheba watches from the palace as the procession winds toward Gihon Spring. Her heart carries the complex emotions of a mother seeing her son elevated to ultimate responsibility. Joy mingles with concern, satisfaction with awareness of the burdens that accompany crown and scepter. The coronation site buzzes with activity as word spreads throughout Jerusalem. Citizens gather with the mixture of curiosity and celebration that marks significant royal events. Some come from genuine loyalty to David's choice, others from simple desire to witness history being made. Zadok performs the anointing with ritual precision that connects earthly ceremony to heavenly authority. The oil flows across Solomon's head like liquid blessing, marking him visibly as the chosen vessel for divine purposes. This moment transforms potential into actuality, promise into accomplished fact. The crowd's response builds gradually as understanding spreads through the assembled multitude. Shouts of "Long live King Solomon" rise from throats that had whispered uncertainty just hours before. The people of Israel accept their new monarch with the enthusiasm reserved for legitimate succession. Musicians add their voices to the celebration with trumpets, harps, and cymbals that make the earth ring with joyful sound. The music carries across Jerusalem's hills, announcing to friend and enemy alike that Israel has a new king. Even the stones seem to echo with celebration. Meanwhile, at Onrogel, Adonai's feast continues in ignorance of events unfolding mere miles away. His supporters raise cups in toast to their presumed king, unaware that their celebration has been overtaken by history's swifter current. The sound of distant trumpets will soon shatter their illusions. Joab recognizes the sound first, his military experience alerting him to significance others miss. The old commander's face shows the dawning realization that his careful calculations have been undone by swifter action. He understands immediately that Adonai's cause has suffered mortal damage. The messenger who brings confirmation of Solomon's coronation finds Adonijah's gathering transformed from celebration to stunned silence. News of David's direct involvement removes any possibility of challenge based on claims of royal ignorance or incapacity. The king has spoken decisively. Adonijah's supporters scatter like startled birds, each seeking personal safety as their collective enterprise collapses. The prince himself faces the terrible moment when ambition meets reality's harder edges. His dream of kingship dies in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Solomon's first royal act demonstrates the wisdom for which he will become renowned. Rather than pursuing vengeance against his half-brother, he offers mercy conditional upon good behavior. This response shows strength tempered by restraint, authority combined with compassion. The new king returns to Jerusalem amid continuing celebration that seems to energize the very air. Citizens line the streets with palm branches and flowers, creating a pathway of honor for their monarch. Children run alongside the royal procession, their laughter adding innocent joy to the day's solemnity. David receives his son in the throne room with evident satisfaction and relief. The old king's eyes show deep gratitude that divine promise has found fulfillment through decisive human action. The transition he has long contemplated now begins its actual unfolding. Bathsheba enters this scene of triumph with quiet dignity that befits both queen and queen mother. Her son's elevation changes her status as well, creating new responsibilities alongside vindication of her faith in divine justice. The woman who once wept over a dead child now witnesses her living son's coronation. The palace transforms as courtiers adjust their allegiances to new realities. Those who supported Solomon find their loyalty rewarded, while others seek ways to demonstrate acceptance of the succession they had quietly opposed. Political winds shift with the speed characteristic of royal transitions. Evening falls on a Jerusalem forever changed by the day's events. Solomon sits upon David's throne as appointed heir and anointed king, his reign beginning with the authority that comes from both human designation and divine blessing. The future spreads before him like an unwritten scroll. The throne-secured peace settles over Jerusalem like morning dew after storm. Solomon's reign begins with the careful establishment of authority that transforms promise into practical governance. The new king moves with deliberate wisdom, securing his position through measured action rather than dramatic gestures. The first challenge comes from managing those who supported Adonijah's failed rebellion. Rather than wholesale punishment, Solomon demonstrates the discernment that will mark his rule. He distinguishes between leaders and followers, between active conspiracy and passive support, offering mercy where appropriate while maintaining necessary discipline. Joab presents the most complex case among the former rebels. The old military commander's long service to David complicates any simple response to his recent disloyalty. Solomon handles this delicate situation with careful justice, honoring past service while addressing present necessity. Abiathar the priest receives exile rather than death, his religious office protecting him from harsher consequences. This decision shows Solomon's respect for spiritual authority, even when disappointed by political choices. The new king understands that mercy can strengthen authority as effectively as severity. Bathsheba finds her position fundamentally transformed by her son's elevation. No longer merely queen, she now becomes queen mother, a role that carries different responsibilities and opportunities. The palace adjusts to accommodate her new status with the flexibility that marks successful institutions. The royal household reorganizes around Solomon's administrative style, which differs notably from his father's more personal approach to governance. Where David relied heavily on individual relationships and direct decision-making, Solomon begins developing systematic procedures that can handle the kingdom's growing complexity. Foreign ambassadors arrive to pay homage to the new monarch and confirm existing treaty relationships. These diplomatic visits provide Solomon with early opportunities to demonstrate the wisdom that will define his reign. He receives each delegation with appropriate ceremony while conducting substantive discussions about mutual interests. The Queen Mother establishes her own court within the larger royal household. Bathsheba's chambers become gathering places for women seeking justice in family disputes, for mothers concerned about their children's futures, for wives navigating the complexities of marriage law. Her experiences have prepared her uniquely for this advisory role. David gradually transfers more responsibilities to his son while maintaining overall supervision of the transition. The old king delights in watching Solomon handle increasingly complex challenges with growing confidence. Father and son work together during these months, sharing power in ways that strengthen rather than divide their authority. The temple project moves forward with renewed energy under Solomon's leadership. Where David collected materials and drafted plans, his son begins coordinating the massive construction effort that will create Israel's permanent house of worship. Foreign craftsmen arrive to share specialized skills with local workers. Trade relationships expand as neighboring kingdoms recognize Israel's stability under new leadership. Solomon's court welcomes merchants from distant lands, creating commercial networks that will bring unprecedented prosperity to the kingdom. The king's natural curiosity about other cultures serves diplomatic and economic purposes well. Bathsheba watches her son navigate these early challenges with maternal pride, tempered by realistic awareness of kingship's burdens. She offers counsel when asked, but respects his growing independence. Their relationship evolves from mother-child to trusted advisors in the complex enterprise of governing Israel. The palace gardens become a favorite venue for informal diplomatic meetings. Solomon discovers that relaxed settings often produce more honest conversations than formal throne room audiences. He walks with visiting dignitaries among flowers and fruit trees, discussing serious matters in environments that encourage openness. Military affairs require careful attention as Solomon establishes his authority over Israel's armed forces. Unlike his father, the new king has not earned his spurs through personal combat, so he must demonstrate leadership through wisdom and strategic thinking rather than battlefield prowess. Religious leaders throughout the kingdom adjust to having a scholarly king whose knowledge of law and custom often surpasses their own. Solomon's deep understanding of scriptural principles influences policy decisions in ways that strengthen Israel's covenant relationship with the Almighty. The transition period concludes with growing confidence throughout the kingdom that divine blessing rests upon the new reign. Harvests prove abundant, enemies remain peaceful, and internal disputes find resolution through the king's increasingly renowned judgment. Israel settles into the rhythm of Solomon's rule. The wisdom of Solomon, morning light, filters through cedar lattices as Solomon rises to face another day of decisions that will shape his kingdom's destiny. The young king has developed patterns of prayer and meditation that anchor his soul before engaging with the endless stream of petitioners, advisors, and dignitaries seeking his attention. The famous dream at Gibeon still echoes in his memory, though months have passed since that night when God offered him anything his heart desired. His request for wisdom rather than wealth or long life marked the beginning of a reign that would become legendary for its judicious decisions and deep understanding. Today brings the case that will establish Solomon's reputation throughout the ancient world. Two women stand before his throne, each claiming the same living child as her own. Their dispute cannot be resolved through witnesses or evidence, only through insight into human nature itself. Bathsheba observes from her customary place as the women present their arguments. She recognizes the desperation in their voices, the fierce maternal love that drives each to claim the infant. As a mother who has known both loss and blessing, she understands the depths of emotion behind their words. The first woman speaks with passionate conviction, describing how her child lives while her neighbors died in the night. Her story flows with the detailed consistency of truth remembered under stress. Yet, her companion counters with equal fervor, reversing the roles and claiming the living child as her own. Court officials exchange uncertain glances as the testimony reveals no clear path to justice. Traditional methods of determining truth seem inadequate to resolve such conflicting claims. The king must find a way through this maze of competing assertions and genuine emotion. Solomon listens with the focused attention that has become his trademark. His questions probe gently but persistently, seeking not just facts, but the underlying truths that facts sometimes obscure. The wisdom God granted him works through careful observation as much as divine inspiration. The moment of decision arrives with dramatic simplicity. Solomon calls for a sword, announcing his intention to divide the disputed child between the two claimants. The proposal strikes the assembly like lightning, revealing the king's willingness to think beyond conventional solutions. One woman accepts this judgment with grim satisfaction, preferring half a child to none at all. But the true mother cries out in anguish, begging the king to give the baby to her rival rather than harm him. Her willingness to sacrifice her claim reveals the authentic love that Solomon sought to uncover. The king's face shows gentle satisfaction as he awards the child to the woman whose love proved greater than her desire for possession. The solution demonstrates wisdom that penetrates surface appearances to reach fundamental truths about human nature and divine justice. Word of this judgment spreads through Jerusalem like wildfire, carried by witnesses who understand they have seen something extraordinary. The story travels beyond Israel's borders, establishing Solomon's reputation for wisdom among distant kingdoms whose rulers marvel at such discernment. Bathsheba approaches her son after the court session with eyes bright with pride and wonder. She has watched him grow from infant to king, but this moment reveals depths of understanding that surprise even her maternal expectations. Divine gift has found expression through human character refined by experience. The Queen Mother's counsel becomes increasingly valuable as Solomon faces complex challenges requiring both wisdom and practical knowledge. Their conversations blend insights from different perspectives, his theoretical understanding with her hard-won experience of palace life and human nature. Religious leaders throughout the kingdom begin seeking Solomon's interpretation of difficult passages in their sacred texts. The king's scholarly approach to scripture, combined with divinely granted wisdom, produces insights that illuminate ancient truths for contemporary application. Foreign scholars arrive at Solomon's court, drawn by reports of his extraordinary understanding. These learned visitors bring questions about philosophy, natural science, and governance that challenge even the king's remarkable intellect. Their exchanges enrich both their knowledge and his. The palace library expands rapidly as Solomon collects writings from various cultures and traditions. He recognizes that wisdom, while ultimately grounded in divine truth, can be found scattered among many peoples and preserved in diverse forms. His collection becomes a treasure house of human learning. Proverbs begin flowing from the king's pen with the abundance of a spring feeding multiple streams. These wise sayings capture practical truths about daily life, human relationships, and spiritual principles in memorable form. Common people quote them alongside scholars and courtiers. Trade delegations find themselves engaged in discussions that range far beyond commercial negotiations. Solomon's curiosity about their homelands, customs, and knowledge transforms routine business meetings into educational exchanges that benefit all participants. The Queen Mother establishes her own reputation for wise counsel, particularly in matters affecting women and families. Bathsheba's insights, shaped by personal experience of both suffering and blessing, provide practical wisdom that complements her son's more theoretical understanding. Evening often finds mother and son walking together in the palace gardens, discussing the day's challenges and decisions. These conversations strengthen their bond while allowing each to benefit from the other's perspective. Bathsheba's questions help Solomon examine his decisions from angles he might otherwise miss. The kingdom prospers under this combination of divine wisdom and human experience. Justice flows more clearly, trade expands steadily, and internal conflicts find resolution through increasingly sophisticated understanding of human motivation and divine principle. Israel enters a golden age of peace and prosperity. The still waters years have flowed like a gentle river through the life of the woman who once stood at the center of scandal and sorrow. Bathsheba, now in the autumn of her years, moves through the palace with the quiet dignity of one who has weathered every storm and found solid ground beneath her feet. The morning light finds her in the garden courtyard where she often takes her first moments of solitude. The same hands that once trembled as she received David's summons now rest peacefully in her lap as she watches the sun paint Jerusalem's walls with gold. Time has been both teacher and healer. Her reflection appears in the still pool that graces this private space. The face that once launched a kingdom's crisis now shows the gentle lines of wisdom earned through suffering and service. Beauty remains, but it has deepened into something more lasting than youth's first bloom. Solomon visits his mother regularly, though his growing responsibilities require careful management of time. Their conversations have evolved from the teaching moments of his youth to exchanges between equals who respect each other's hard-won understanding. She listens to his challenges with the attention of one who has navigated similar waters. The Queen Mother's quarters have become an informal court where women throughout the kingdom seek counsel and comfort. Wives facing difficult marriages, mothers worried about wayward children, daughters struggling with family expectations, all find their way to Bathsheba's presence. Her story of redemption offers hope to those who feel trapped by circumstances. She speaks rarely of the events that first brought her to royal attention. When questions arise, as they sometimes do from younger women who know only legends, she responds with gentle wisdom that neither glorifies nor condemns the past. Some experiences become teachers only through the long perspective that years provide. The temple construction fills these days with purposeful activity that connects present labor to eternal significance. Bathsheba watches the great work progress with the satisfaction of one who understands that God's purposes often work through human weakness toward divine strength. Her son builds what her husband dreamed. Foreign queens occasionally visit Solomon's court, and Bathsheba receives them with the gracious hospitality that befits her position. These encounters reveal how far she has traveled from the frightened young woman who once feared for her life. Authority now flows naturally from her bearing without arrogance or pretense. The palace scribes often seek her recollections of earlier reigns and customs. She provides these historical insights with careful accuracy, understanding that her memories will help shape official records. The woman who once lived history now helps preserve it for future generations to study and understand. Prayer has become as natural as breathing in her daily rhythm. The God who seemed distant during her darkest hours now feels as close as the air around her. She has learned that divine presence often reveals itself most clearly through life's ordinary moments rather than its dramatic crises. Grandchildren bring new joy to her later years, though Solomon's expanding household creates complexity alongside blessing. She watches these young ones with a special delight reserved for those who have learned to treasure each generation's unique gifts. Their laughter echoes through halls that once knew only whispered secrets. The seasonal festivals hold deeper meaning now than in her youth. Each celebration connects her personal story to Israel's larger narrative of covenant and blessing. She participates with the understanding that individual lives find their ultimate significance within God's greater purposes for his chosen people. Letters arrive occasionally from friends and relatives in distant places, connecting her to a wider world beyond palace walls. These correspondences remind her that the royal court, for all its importance, represents only one part of the larger human community to which she belongs. Evening often finds her on the rooftop terrace where this story began so many years ago. But now she comes seeking peace rather than privacy, reflection rather than escape. The view over Jerusalem shows a city prospering under her son's wise rule, vindication of divine purposes she once doubted. The stars emerge as darkness deepens, each point of light a reminder of promises made to Abraham about descendants as numerous as heaven's host. Her own family line extends into that great company, carrying forward the covenant through generations yet unborn. Personal story becomes part of eternal narrative. Sleep comes easily now, without the restless anxiety that once troubled her nights. Dreams may come bring comfort rather than confusion. She has made peace with her past and found purpose in her present. Tomorrow will bring its own grace, as all tomorrows have since she learned to trust divine timing. The woman who began as a figure glimpsed from a rooftop has become a pillar of strength within the royal household. Her journey from scandal to honor, from victim to counselor, from despair to peace, illustrates the mysterious ways divine mercy transforms human weakness into unexpected strength. Bathsheba's story flows toward its quiet conclusion like a stream finding the sea. The still waters that once reflected a young woman's vulnerability now mirror the deep peace of one who has discovered that God's purposes prevail even through human failure. Her life stands as testimony that no mistake proves beyond redemption's reach. The night settles gently over Jerusalem, covering the city where kings have reigned and prophets have spoken, where temples have risen and wisdom has flourished. In the palace chambers, an aging woman rests in the knowledge that her story, begun in shadows, concludes in light. The still waters have become a mirror reflecting divine grace, and